Chapter 691. Science was the accumulation of human knowledge in the process of understanding the laws of nature. Physics, mathematics, and incarnations would gradually accumulate in this process to form objective laws. When everything returned to the most basic atoms and molecules, science and technology would also usher in its own great era of development. But in Aisha's world, the elements were the source and foundation of everything. Many substances were created from the elements. Research and exploration of elemental magic existed throughout the growth of every civilization and society. The magic system was the most mainstream knowledge system in this world. Mags were scholars. They needed to accumulate power and knowledge through studying. Theoretically speaking, it was as unreliable as a 7- or 8-year-old child becoming a scientist instead of going to school. If such a thing really happened, it would either be a transmigrator whose soul had transmigrated, or a magical beast in human skin. Although the current magic system was complete, with all sorts of wondrous magical mysteries that attracted people's attention, the most foundational part was still the application of the most basic elements. High-temperature flames would cause explosions. The ignition point of a substance would also mean the end of the substance. Fierce winds would bring powerful pushing and cutting power, which was the direct manifestation of invisible power. Water's permeability was just as important as life itself. The earth silently bore everything, including mortals who needed to survive. That was why fire magic was developed into all sorts of area of effect attacks. Water magic had a large area of effect, a high temperature, and astonishing damage. Water magic had the weakest attack power, but it had many variations and certain healing abilities. Low-level earth magic was specialized in defense, but when it reached high-level earth magic, no matter if it was destroying or building walls, nobody would be able to compare. This was quite similar to the natural sciences, which used the laws of nature to develop. Didn't basic mechanics, magnetism, and electricity all come about in the same way? First, the special effects of substances on the surface would gradually be analyzed. Then, the discovered laws and technology would be used to modify nature, and special man-made objects would be used to create one's own high-level civilization. So, I was wrong from the very beginning. This type of teaching was even more effective than learning everything from the very beginning, especially from the perspective of someone who had succeeded. If I still couldn't learn this type of personal experience, I would truly be an idiot. Harlois didn't simply place the soul books of the ice and snow mags in front of me. As an ordinary mage, her understanding of magic had long since surpassed the limits of what the ice and snow mags could understand. She had categorized and summarized the entire magic system, and had a deep understanding of every mainstream and branch magic school. On top of this foundation, she gave me a reading list so that I could have a bird's-eye view of the entire ice and snow magic system. Then, I could choose the branch magic I needed based on my own conditions and needs. Only then would I be able to learn the branch magic that I needed through the soul book of the mage of that particular branch magic school. Although ice and snow are elements that already exist in the natural world, they aren't basic elements. Rather, they're a composite concept composed of two concepts. The first is water, and the second is low temperature. Only when both are present will ice and snow be created. That's why most ice and snow mags will study water magic as well. Or, it could be said that the ice and snow mage job class originally evolved from water mags. If you don't have water magic power, it'll be very difficult for you to cultivate ice and snow magic. Don't ask me how you learned ice and snow magic. Just think of it as a wild animal's instincts. Harlois's categorization of ice and snow magic was completely different from the traditional way of categorizing magic spells based on their effects and historical inheritances. Her categorization of ice and snow magic was more like a reference book. Many ice and snow magic spells are extensions of water magic. For example, summon water elements to create a wall of water. When combined with low temperature, you'll create an ice wall with excellent defensive power. For example, ice cones with astonishing attack power. More than 70% of the spell formulas are identical to the famous weak 2-circle water ball spell. As Harlois explained, the entire system of ice and snow magic was completely revealed. That was the result of countless people's research. However, They were all scattered bits of knowledge. Yet, Harloise's understanding of ice and snow magic formed a relatively complete arcane magic system. Ice and snow magic was divided into two major categories. One was ice magic, while the other was snow magic. In Harloise's eyes, they were two completely different magic systems. Ice is the special form that water takes when it's in a low temperature. The spell formulas for ice and snow magic are relatively simple. Usually, you just need to rapidly freeze water, and then use the ice's sharpness, hardness, quality, and low temperature to injure your opponent. If you want to be good at ice and snow magic, you'll need to have an excellent foundation in water magic. Only then will you be able to make ice and water unpredictable and difficult to defend against. As Harloise demonstrated, the water ball constantly froze on her arm, transforming into ice swords, ice hammers, and ice shields as she pleased. The most ridiculous part of all was that she actually transformed into a gigantic geared electric saw. The water part was in charge of agility, while the sharp ice part was in charge of killing. A 9-sectioned whip, a 3-sectioned staff, an ice weapon that could transform at will, and an ice spear that could be of any length at will. Perhaps I had been using ice weapons incorrectly all this time. The most famous ice magic systems include the Arctic Sea's snow dancers and the Bearman's snowman armor. Many of them are magic warriors who cultivate both magic and martial arts. This is because large-scale ice magic consumes too much mana and is too slow, making it unsuitable for pure mags. Small ice weapons can appear and disappear unpredictably, and they're far too useful when paired with martial arts cultivation. Out of all the ice warriors, your Aurora Knight is one of the most outstanding ones. Their ice swords and ice armor that can transform at will are incredibly powerful. However, they have the most mana, and their usage is far too crude. They're basically a bunch of magical beasts with a low degree of development. I silently nodded. The Aurora Knight's combat techniques were indeed quite crude. In the air, they would use ice bombs and ice spear charges. On the ground, they would use Frigid Moor as the main knight, with the Aurora Knight as support. Even though they had an incredible amount of mana, their destructive power and combat strength couldn't compare to mags of the same level. Snow magic is one of the major categories that I've categorized myself. It's an ice magic that imitates the natural world's ice and snow calamities. It's a series of ice magic spells that mainly use low temperatures to kill the opponent. There are far too many such spells, such as blizzard, polar avalanche, frost, and so on. Your ice eon is one of them. The advantage of imitating the natural world's snow calamities is that the spell model is easy to construct, and the attack power and area of effect are quite satisfactory. There won't be any laughable scenes of using 10 mana for nothing. This is quite common in ice magic, where you can create a super hard ice spell that still won't be able to kill the opponent. The disadvantage is that the spell model is fixed, and the spell's trajectory is obvious. It's easy to predict and dodge. Also, the larger the scale of a snow magic spell, the more it will require a low temperature. This means that it will require a tremendous amount of mana and a long casting time. No matter how powerful a spell is, it'll be meaningless if it's too slow. However, some idiots also began to pursue it. No matter how slow it is, as long as I clean the entire map, you won't be able to escape. How should I evaluate this? This isn't the work of a mage at all. It's a pure waste of mana. It's so stupid that I don't even want to say it. Yep, I'm not talking about you. Do you believe me? Harloise had given me an entire system of ice magic, but the worst part was that she had only just begun. This, and this are all the spells that you need to learn. After learning all of this, you should be able to fill up your completely empty spell list. In the future, apart from casting forbidden spells, you'll only be playing with ice swords. Don't even mention that you're my disciple. I can't afford to lose face like that. There were more than 30 soul books and more than 400 ordinary magic books. I was already feeling like I wanted to become a truant. Previously, I had spent an entire night just reading a single soul book. Not only that, I had even temporarily sunk into a strange state of confusion about who exactly I was. This type of teaching method where one's soul memories were directly poured into one's brain wasn't something that an ordinary person would be able to accept. Another stack of books was placed on the table next to me. This time, there were more than 60 soul books. In order to become a top-level ice and snow mage, you need to at least make up for water magic at the level of a legend-ranked mage. Even if you can't cast a single spell, your theoretical knowledge should at least be up to standard. You're so lucky. Water magic is also one of the 4 elements. I have far more here than ice magic. Following that, another floating disc brought a stack of books. Right, you're using magic just like a magical beast's natural talent. Actually, many warlocks and dragon bloodline mags do the same. You can refer to their memories and combat experience. What's wrong with you? I'm trying to teach you out of goodwill, but you actually dare to play truant. Chapter 692. From a certain standpoint, Harloise's teaching method was indeed quite effective. Not only did she teach me knowledge from books, but she also taught me practical combat experience. This was basically cheating. On the other hand, this method of learning was far too dangerous. Apart from obvious physical characteristics, the difference between an individual and another individual would be their internal nature. And this so-called internal nature was nothing more than a person's memories and soul. Personality was the product of both memories and soul. Since memories could be transplanted, wouldn't personality be transplanted as well? And Harloise gave me a definite answer. She had previously mass-produced low-level mags who were exactly the same. In that case, this was a philosophical question. When a person's memories were replaced by an outsider's memories, would that person be the original person or the outsider? Their physical body would be the original person, but their personality and memories would be someone else's. Am I me because my physical body is me? Is it because my soul is me? Is it because my memories are me? In that case, is it because my memories are me? In that case, if my physical body is cloned and my memories are poured into it, is it also me? Cough. Not only was such a question a tongue twister or a word game, there was no answer at all, so it was best not to take it too seriously. It was just that when someone else's memories were poured into one's mind, and the past events in the soul books were like your own personal experiences, it was quite easy for a person with a weak soul and ego to lose themselves. In the end, they would become vassals of memories and knowledge, becoming the physical body of the memories in the soul books. Harloise didn't tell me what the consequences of mass-producing mags would be like. Just thinking about it would be like shooting yourself in the foot. She had personally harvested all these soul books. Once the souls that had lost themselves were revived, they would naturally seek out the culprit for revenge. Just thinking about having a bunch of mags who hated their very bones would make me shudder. Even though Harloise had done her best to strip away all her daily memories and knowledge that had nothing to do with magic, the secrets of the soul and memories were still hidden in a dense fog. After reading several soul books in a row, I began to feel confused about my own existence, so I hurriedly shouted for her to stop. My soul had already been cleansed by the river Styx, so there was no need to mention how strong I was. If even I had such a problem, any ordinary mage who tried to read these books would likely be directly brainwashed. If they read several books in a row, they would likely suffer from schizophrenia. However, seeing how Harloise casually flipped through these soul books without any side effects, it could only be said that everyone had their own strengths. I could faintly understand why Harloise was able to split herself into so many clones. She must have been schizophrenic from the very start. Even if you're split into countless pieces, every piece will still be Heloise. What a powerful sense of self. You're a natural slime. If you plant one Heloise in spring, you'll be able to harvest a dozen in autumn. Damn it, don't bite me. The silly cat had been quite happy at first, but she accidentally said the last sentence, which caused a row of teeth marks to appear on her face. However, I had another rather reliable inference. Perhaps the truth was that Harloise had gotten used to reading soul books, which would cause her self-awareness to become chaotic. That was why she had such a clear sense of self. Due to the river Styx's cleansing, I had ridiculously high resistance against mental magic. Meanwhile, Harloise was probably almost completely immune to mental magic. As for me, even though I wasn't able to read soul books very quickly, my growth rate was still astonishing. During the day, I would hunt for ice magic to accumulate mana, and at night, I would eat one or two archmages' magical knowledge. My magic level would improve at an astonishing rate. It would be no exaggeration to say that I would be able to learn 10 years in just one day. It was a pity that there was still a gap between learning magical engineering knowledge that had been forced onto me and actually learning it. It would be no problem for me to learn it, but it would still take more time to improve it. What a joke! The tremendous amount of new knowledge that I had obtained helped me to restart my research on my ice element myth-ranked weapon design. Perhaps the reason why I hadn't made any progress before was because I didn't have enough accumulated knowledge. But the real battle on the second day gave me the opportunity to train in actual combat. It had been many years since I had such a meaningful feeling. Being able to feel like I was growing stronger every day was far too precious to me and the other ancient artifacts. I could faintly sense that the moment I broke through that final line, my future path would be limitless. Although I hadn't completely reworked my myth-ranked weapon design concept, it was only natural that it would be greatly improved as I became more and more skilled in theory. Also, my mastery of a tremendous number of magic spell formulas finally allowed me to break free from the habit of being a second-rate archmage who accumulated mana and threw it. I was now able to do new things on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the elemental war was only becoming more and more intense. The battlefield was just like a meat grinder. Every day, it would be possible to see ice elemental creatures and fire elemental creatures fighting against each other. The Great Snow Mountain magical realm had also created an elemental node here. A tremendous amount of ice power was pouring out from it. On one side, there were mountains of ice and seas of snow, while on the other side, there were volcanoes and magma. Both sides were fighting ever more viciously, but no top-level elemental creatures had appeared on the battlefield yet. It seemed that it still wasn't the time for high-level communication yet. Of course, from a certain standpoint, this was a good thing as well. At the very least, it would allow me, a hunter who was only at the edge of the battlefield, to obtain more benefits. I wouldn't need to get involved in the battles between ice elemental lords. Even for the current me, that would be incredibly dangerous. And so, the famous ice armor harvester appeared at the edge of the battlefield. As I stood there, icy winds invaded the entire battlefield. Large amounts of low-level fire elemental creatures were instantly extinguished before they could even get close to me. Although this seemed rather familiar, there was actually a foundational difference. Mom doesn't have to worry about my butt freezing to the toilet bowl anymore. I'm no Meow King, nor am I Kill Jaden. Actually, only now did I realize how foolish I had been. Not only had I experienced the ice throne incident, my previous ice armor created by coldest ice had also caused me to get frostbite time and time again. Actually, other ice mags also used ice as their defense, but they hadn't encountered such an indescribable problem. In the past, I had thought that they were just stubbornly resisting the cold, but it turned out that I had been skipping class or sleeping in class and hadn't heard the important part. Maintaining an appropriate layer of water beneath my ice armor would not only create a natural insulation layer, it would also make my ice armor more agile. It could be said that water magic cultivation was incredibly important in order to be a good ice mage. Yet, I had only learned this today. And so, I no longer needed to cultivate my own cold resistance. Previously, I had truly believed that everyone else would be able to resist the cold together. A mysterious sadness caused tears to well up in my eyes, but they instantly froze into ice crystals. If someone like you can become a semigod ice mage, then the other ice mags should be crying. Let's not talk about such trivial matters. At the very least, I was having a great time killing monsters here. Unfortunately, some people couldn't stand me being so idle, and new trouble had come looking for me. Chapter 693. While I was on vacation in the elemental battlefield, the entire world didn't stop either. The battle in the center of the continent had fallen into an abnormal state of confusion. Although the undead calamity hadn't stopped, the speed at which they were advancing had greatly decreased. In fact, there was even news that the undead army had split up. Meanwhile, the revived Great Demon Empire remained abnormally silent even after destroying the Holy Church's defensive line. They didn't invade human territory as expected, which was rather puzzling. At this moment, the battle in the continent reached a temporary equilibrium. The gods were paying attention, and the mortals were waiting to see which species would be the first to break the equilibrium and invade human territory. The first to attack didn't necessarily mean that they would benefit the most. It was possible that the first to attack would be beaten to a pulp. Even though the battle in the continent was now rather balanced, everyone knew that such days wouldn't last for long. It was destined that only one species would become the ruler of this continent. Meanwhile, in the remote Northlands, the overall situation was difficult to see. The news of Roland and the Elven Empress assassination continued to spread. The furious Mist Kingdom and Elven Empire allied armies attacked. Under absolute military pressure, the Moon Kingdom of the Elves fell into chaos. They pushed the blame onto each other and spent the last of their time looking for the culprit. When the Elven Empire's army entered the city, the Mist Alliance didn't show any mercy like before. It was the opposite. Every day, several hundred Moon Elf nobles would be hung on the city walls. At first, there would be signs with crimes such as rebellion or betrayal on the walls. But after that, there would be no more such crimes. Every day, there would be more hanging on the city walls. All government officials, organizations that were loyal to the former Moon Kingdom of the Elves were directly uprooted. The old nobles were completely wiped out. In the future Elven Empire, there would be no need for such special elves to exist. Meanwhile, in the south, the Divine Alliance's battle lines were becoming fiercer and fiercer. They're still thinking about internal strife at such a time. That's the tragedy of humanity. The little fellows from the Holy Church are too powerful. Same here. Aren't you still trying to scam the Holy Church? I could only helplessly shake my head. If I had a choice, I would be more than willing to let go of my prejudices and work together with the Holy Church to overcome this difficult time. After all, life would only become more and more difficult in the future. But even if I told the truth, it was likely that nobody would believe me. Joining the Mist Alliance during the trial period? Only you could think of such a thing. The Holy Church's churches will definitely be furious. They spent so much effort to surround the Mist Alliance, yet they still managed to leave an opening. Black and white political thinking is already outdated. At this time, a fence-sitter is more useful than a firm ally. The Soan Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom had even volunteered to join the Mist Alliance so that they wouldn't become cannon fodder for the Holy Church. If they had joined the Mist Alliance at that time, that would have been the equivalent of making the Holy Church and the Mist Alliance's enmity with each other obvious. Not only would the Mist Alliance's defense plans have to be completely revised, but they would also have to shoulder a heavy burden. Once the Mist Alliance's southern expansion connected with the countries of the Holy Northern Alliance, it was likely that there would be many more kings who wouldn't be able to sleep at night. This was like a tiger sleeping at your bedside. Who would dare to believe it if it said it didn't eat meat? At that time, the Holy Church would just need to make some connections, and the Anti-Mist Alliance would truly be established. This would obviously be foolish. Not only would there be a long food supply line, it would be far too risky to turn future allies who shared the same roots and had no conflicts with each other into enemies. This was also the Holy Church's goal. They didn't need to do anything to the Mist Alliance. All they needed to do was incite internal conflict between the other countries and the Mist Alliance so that they wouldn't be able to peacefully develop. My method of dealing with this was to give the Soan Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom the status of a secondary, reserve, member. They wouldn't need to take on the Mist Alliance's responsibilities, but they would be able to receive the Mist Alliance's assistance when necessary. However, the Mist Alliance wouldn't necessarily need to provide them with military assistance. This was obviously an unreliable agreement, but it was a happy ending for both parties. The Soan Dukedom and the Feldis Kingdom would still be able to maintain their independence, and if the Holy Church pushed them too far, they could directly call for help from their big brother in the north. The Soan Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom could even join the Northern Divine Alliance. Of course, as long as there weren't any other restrictions, both agreements would be effective at the same time. At that time, even if the blockade line was formed, there would still be the Mist Alliance's entrance and exit, so the blockade would be meaningless. And if the Northern Divine Alliance forced the Soan Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom to join, the Mist Alliance would definitely send troops. At that time, it would be obvious who was right and who wasn't. Was this alliance agreement between reserve countries reliable? It wasn't reliable at all. However, mutual benefits made this alliance incredibly effective. Perhaps this was only a political word game, but it was far more effective than being direct. This was an actual mutual benefit between the two countries. The Soan Dukedom and Feldis Kingdom needed a backer to support their independence, while the Mist Alliance needed a southern supply line. The politics of alliances in this world were still in the Middle Ages. It was rather straightforward. Either you agreed to it or you didn't. It didn't matter if you agreed to it or you didn't. However, the strange alliance that was abnormally strong due to the mutual benefits was an idea that I had come up with from a certain case in another world. Of course, while the idea was good, there were always unexpected things in reality. The Feldis Kingdom's political situation had recently become unstable. The loyal believers of the Holy Light Church had begun gathering without permission, and the domain lords who were close to the Holy Light Church had begun criticizing the royal family for not being in power. I can guess what will happen next. The royal family will definitely meet with an unexpected incident and die out. The domain lords who are close to the Holy Light Church will be encouraged by the public to confer the title of king, and the entire country will begin to tilt towards the south. The Holy Church is far too familiar with this. Do you intend to just watch all of this happen? Of course not. Although the benefits are outside of the country, we still have to fight for what we should. We've long since sent out our scouts and spies. The Mist Alliance sent out a 1,000-man elite squadron at once. Right now, the Holy Church and our spies are probably fighting to the death in another country's capital. Right, there's also an elite squadron from the Church of Law. We can't fall behind in spreading our teachings. The spies from both sides were fighting to the death in a third country's territory for the sake of their own organization's benefits. They wouldn't reveal their identities even if they were about to die. This scene was becoming more and more like a spy movie. However, my revenge had only just begun. Actually, I've always wanted to ask, what have you been writing recently? Estrada's sayings? What kind of nonsense is that? For a church, there's nothing more dangerous than internal conflict caused by differences in teachings. Actually, in my opinion, Estrada is definitely more worthy of being called the god of holy light than Roland. An evil cult that's trying to divide the believers? Yep, an evil cult that has a true god. Don't you find that interesting? I think that Estrada won't agree. He's already a god in the sky. So what if he doesn't agree? Come down and bite me. Actually, I had always treated the gods in the same way. You're already a totem in the sky, so what's the point of interfering with the mortal world? I did my best to recall Estrada's words and actions, and then recalled the heartless reality that I was always slacking off when he was teaching me. Feeling helpless, I began to make up random stories. TSK, everyone else makes up random stories like this when they write their seniors' sayings. It doesn't matter if I'm one more. Yep, Estrada said, the god of holy light is an idiot. Come down and bite me if you dare. Estrada really will come down and bite you. Chapter 694. A plan to relocate the wood spirits to the north. Wasn't that rejected back in the day? I paused in surprise when I saw the official document Renee handed me. I couldn't even understand what was going on. In order to create a comprehensive defense plan for the entire Northlands, I had tried my best to convince Amelia to relocate a portion of the wood spirits to live in the Northlands. That would greatly alleviate the food and environmental problems in the Northlands. But in the end, no matter how much I tried to entice her or how many tempting conditions I promised her, she always said I don't have the conditions. Why did she change her mind? Take a look for yourself. There were many details on the document. One of them was a feasibility report that caught my attention. Feasibility report on planting the Forest of Dreams in an active volcano environment. The report was quite simple. It only gave a general idea. The general idea was that with enough geothermal energy, the seeds of the Forest of Dreams would be able to sprout and bloom. Then, as long as the geothermal energy could be maintained until the Forest of Dreams expanded to a certain area, it would be able to achieve internal balance. A new Forest of Dreams would then be able to establish itself in the Northlands. This is wonderful news. If it succeeds, Our food shortage will be reduced by at least half. We'll also have a powerful nature alliance, which will be greatly beneficial to the entire Mist Alliance. Renee, why do you seem so unhappy? Is there a problem with what I said? No problem. Please continue. I can't stop you. It was quite obvious that she was angry. But based on my many years of experience, young women would often go into a period of irritation for inexplicable reasons. Trying to get to the bottom of things at such a time would only invite trouble. At such a time, as a mature gentleman, I should, do you have a stomachache? Cough, I understand. I have some painkillers that I got from the elves. All right then, this girl actually glared at me before leaving without even saying goodbye. She was so rude. I really wanted to see who taught her to be so rude. Didn't you teach her to be like that? Cough, cough, let's not look into those random things. At the very least, it would be great news for the entire Mist Alliance if a portion of the wood spirits could migrate to the Northlands. The devils had worked so hard to create a volcano eruption. The result was that not only did the Northlands have a reason to not participate in the continent's internal strife, they even received reinforcements from the wood spirits. Due to the elemental war, the ice elemental plane and the Mist Alliance's relationship had improved by leaps and bounds. Apart from all that, I felt that the benefits were greater than the losses. Could it be that the devils were here to give us gifts? It's not that easy. You should read more about the requirements in the document. Indeed, I had previously completed a quest to expand the Forest of Dreams. At that time, the requirements for the Forest of Dreams environment were quite high. Not only that, the process of creating the Forest of Dreams would require a lot of space to be cut up. It was only natural that the natural residents in the area would react. The moment that the Forest of Dreams' ancient tree seeds were created, elemental creatures would surround and attack us. Absorbing geothermal energy, this was obviously an attempt to steal from the fire elemental plane. Just thinking about it made it obvious what would happen. But, when considering the benefits, this was completely acceptable. And once the fire elemental plane took shape, it would be the same as the wood spirits and ice elemental creatures blocking the fire elemental plane together. It would be quite difficult for the fire elemental creatures to make a comeback. Perhaps the fire elemental plane would even become a thermostat that would improve the Northlands' environment. I kept feeling like the devils and fire elemental lords were here to give us gifts. Now that the situation in the Northlands had become clear and everything was going well, I also felt like it was time for me to escape. Yep, I definitely wasn't trying to escape before Amelia arrived in the Northlands. I was someone who would never do anything against my conscience. Of course, there were still some trivial matters that needed to be taken care of as quickly as possible, such as the construction of the new regions in the Elven Empire, Swanna's resurrection ritual, and the hunting down of the Chaos Abyss devils that had become like rats on the streets. Currently, the fires of war were raging everywhere in the mortal plane. However, most places maintained a certain degree of balance. The most eye-catching place was the former kingdom of the elves located in the southwestern mountain range. There, the black flood of demons had completely gone out of control. Countless Chaos Abyss demons were walking out from within. Under the leadership of powerful main gods, the Chaos Abyss's destructive flood was unstoppable. Including the Moonwheel Kingdom of the Elves, 3 middle-sized countries and 11 small countries had already been destroyed. Over 2 million people had died or gone missing from the first demon wave. Meanwhile, the mega-empires of the mortal plane were abnormally silent. They were waiting for the demon wave's berserk phase to end. They were waiting for the short-lived Chaos War slaves to use up their lives in a frenzy. The Order gods were also waiting. They were waiting for the demon wave to end so that they could gang up on the exhausted Chaos War gods and chase them back to the Chaos Abyss for their glory. After the first demon wave ended, the various demon lords would walk out from the Chaos Abyss. That would be the true Chaos Abyss Expedition Army. This would be a battle of attrition that would determine the fate of the world. The will of the Chaos Abyss watched over the first demon wave. It was impossible to defend against the first demon wave. This was something learned from countless previous holy wars. The Moonwheel Elves' experience once again proved this to be true. One couldn't blame the observers for being cold-blooded. Since it was destined that humans would be used up, the Moonwheel elves would naturally choose the citizens of other countries. Every day, tens or even hundreds of thousands of warriors and civilians would die. The hungry demons wouldn't be able to distinguish between civilians and soldiers. Every day, more than 10 times the number of refugees would be born. Farmers would abandon their fields, and militia would abandon their villages. Nobody would punish them, because even the domain lords who had always been high and mighty had abandoned their own territories. It was said that even the military observers sent out by the various countries had lost several thousand people in this calamity. The observers had been observing the battle from what they thought was a safe underground fortress, but they never expected to encounter the deep rock demons that had burrowed into the ground. The observers had been observing from high mountains, but they never expected to encounter the Chaos Abyss's demon dragons. The observers had been gathering information from several countries away, but they never expected that several countries would simultaneously be destroyed by a single demon god's sword. The tide would rise and fall, and the mana tide would not last forever. Everyone was waiting for the moment when the tide fell. Only then would the actual counterattack be effective. It was precisely because of the eruption of war everywhere, especially the arrival of the demon wave, that all the countries entered a state of war. All the countries began to expand their armies in preparation for war. The countries' industries were also being fully militarized. However, there were two calamities that arrived even earlier: the plague of the dead and the famine of the living. It really is as if the 4 nights of Armageddon have arrived. The famine that I had anticipated arrived even faster than I had imagined. All the countries were collecting military food, which meant that there was no food available on the international market. The arrival of the refugee wave and the loss of large amounts of human territory further exacerbated the spread of the famine. The only thing worth celebrating was that if the demon wave had arrived 3 or 4 months earlier, it would have been impossible to harvest this year's autumn crops. All the country's granaries wouldn't be full, which would have made the famine far scarier. Meanwhile, the plague of the dead was a new type of abnormal plague. Unlike the undead calamity, the plague of the dead wouldn't create any high-level undead creatures. Nor would there be any undead leaders. The plague of the dead would simply transform humanoid creatures into low-level zombie-like creatures that would drool and roll their eyes as they furiously attacked all living creatures around them. As for why it was called zombie-like instead of actually being zombies, that was because they were still alive. In fact, it was even possible to use pure holy light to reverse this process and restore them to their original state. In this world where forbidden spells were everywhere, the plague of the dead wouldn't have much destructive power. However, the plague of the dead wouldn't have much destructive power. If the source wasn't quickly cut off, a town would become a ghost town, and the zombies would starve to death within 10 days. They wouldn't even be able to reach the next town. The plague of the dead wouldn't have as much destructive power as the standard undead calamity. On the other hand, no matter how the undead emperors tried to explain themselves, and they didn't try to explain themselves, it was obvious that someone else was controlling the plague of the dead. Another piece of news announced the end of my vacation. Chapter 695. If possible, I don't want to hear that legend's name at all. The person at the top of the calamity rankings, the person whose name couldn't even be mentioned, hadn't returned. Yes, he didn't reply. The man didn't reply, because he was too happy. He said it twice more. In front of me was a package that came from the Chaos Abyss. Within it was a shiny red gemstone that was as large as my palm. It was dazzling, and if one used an arcane magic's vision to look at it, they would be instantly blinded. Sun King's Divine Right, Ruby, Item Grade, Artifact. This gem came from the crown of the ancient sun god whose name has been forgotten. It contains the understanding and worship of light of that sun civilization. Value, unable to calculate. P.S. It got it, and in the process, kill it as soon as possible. I didn't want to know what the system had left out, but I already had a faint idea. That was because along with the package, there was also a short group photo taken by the gnomes. In the photo, there was a big-mouthed monster and a birdman in a wedding dress. This made me feel that it was great that I wasn't invited to the wedding. He actually defeated the ancient sun god. From a certain standpoint, I had nothing to say to that person. As for whether that birdman was male or female, or how he was defeated, I would rather not know than ask. Let's discuss that person's message first. Talking to the charming Aloyo made me understand the beauty of the outside world. The infinite multiverse and the various species are fascinating. Lord Roland, I finally understand what you mean when you say my journey is the Sea of Stars. From today on, the journey of Beifeng Herald will be the Sea of Stars, too. So, he wasn't coming back. Sea of Stars. Was he planning to go to other planes? It wasn't anything difficult for him, so why did he have to specifically mention it? Wait, if he didn't come back, how was I supposed to complete the quest my system gave me? She really would pour the spring of the drowned woman on me. Don't worry. I'll consider this mission completed. I'm very satisfied with the results. My system, who had been furious just a moment ago, was now obviously delighted. Just as I was filled with doubts, the creator goddess of chaos actually explained everything to me. He has already left this crystal sphere to wreak havoc in other worlds. What? Leave the crystal sphere? He directly left this universe and went to another universe. How did he do it? You can do that. At first, I was stunned. Then, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then, I felt inexplicably happy. Maybe we should hold a celebration party to celebrate that the universe is finally safe. Agreed. Seconded. Even the silly cat was happily nodding her head. It would seem that a certain someone's deterrence was far too astonishing. So be it. There won't be a next time anyway. However, it seemed that I spoke too early, as the hard-working delivery boy delivered a second package to me. I originally thought that it would be the remaining myth-ranked material, but when I opened it, I found a letter and a map. As it turned out, there was another item that I wanted, the Supreme God's sacrificial magic mirror that could gather light. This item had long since been lost to history, but with Aloyo's divine power as a guide, it was possible to find its location. It was still in the mortal plane, so Aloyo drew a map for us. Ha, what a practical person. There are words on the back. I'm Beifeng. That birdman wants to kidnap me and bring me to the multiverse. Although I think it's not a bad idea to go and take a look, he doesn't intend to return. That's why I left behind a dimensional coordinate. It's at the 212th level of the Chaos Abyss. I'll definitely return. Oops, my hand slipped. A bottle of ink was poured onto the back of the map along with a black cat's paw. Then, we nodded and went to prepare for tonight's celebration party. Actually, since Beifeng wasn't going to return, I might as well go collect his bounty money. If you're certain that he won't return, you can go collect it. Otherwise, your reputation will be ruined. Indeed. This is just like a hero secretly taking a stroll in a park to kill some time, only to come back and say that he still killed the Demon King, and then the Demon King will come back again in 2 days. At that time, I'll lose all my reputation. This analogy, it's such a subtle one. The silly cat's expression was quite subtle as well. But no matter what, there would definitely be a celebration party. You intend to go find that mirror? It's better than stealing it from the Holy Church. Then, do you intend to use that ability to break through to semigod rank? Holy light or ice? I'll just take it one step at a time. The order isn't important. No, it's very important. The silly cat's insistence was rather incomprehensible. The next instant, I noticed that she was reading the sayings of Estrada that I was currently writing. I instantly understood. So she cared about who was the most important teacher to me. We should be able to stay in the Northlands for a while longer and hunt down more elemental creatures. We'll try to break through to semigod rank before we depart. That way, we'll be much safer in the future. Yeah. The silly cat unhesitatingly agreed, which made me mysteriously feel guilty. My knowledge of ice had greatly improved, but I had to repeatedly revise the concept of my magic sword Northlands. I really wasn't confident that I would be able to make a breakthrough in the short term. It would seem that I'll have to work overtime again. From a certain standpoint, Beifeng's inability to return actually gave me an unexpected gift. That extra bottle of Spring of the Drowned Woman was now mine. Now, it was time for me to play a prank, punish evil. Of course, the other main reason was that I felt that if I didn't use this item as soon as possible, I would definitely be the unlucky one. I made a list for myself of those who had offended me in the past. I didn't take revenge on them, or it wasn't appropriate for me to take revenge on them, but now that I thought about it, the result was rather sad. I wanted to take revenge on Renee, Harlois, and my system the most, but they were completely unafraid of the spring of the drowned woman. But if I tossed the spring of the drowned man that I had prepared for Collos onto Renee, that would probably be quite an amusing joke, but Collos would probably cry herself to death. Actually, you can take revenge on society. Have you forgotten? You're just a blind creature. I heard a mysterious voice of temptation by my ear as the figures of the Steel Torrent and Eaglestorm flashed before my eyes. If I could turn them into women, that would be such a beautiful scene. I wanted to find a place to vomit first. Indeed, I can consider it. I fell into deep contemplation as I looked at the blue and red bottles in front of me. Was the galloping cow more interesting, or was it Druil who was a naked woman dressed in animal skin? Didn't Druil always wear animal skin? It wasn't like he hadn't seen female Druil before, and there were plenty of ugly ones out there. If he turned them into beautiful ones, wouldn't that just be giving benefits to others? Cough, have Shueti and Collos come with me. I have some things I'd like to discuss with them. Yep, tell them that it's a surprise. Chapter 696. Every day, the situation in Ike was becoming more and more chaotic. The undead, demons, and other species from other planes would bring us bad news every day. Meanwhile, the Holy Church was becoming more and more active. They had already sent out their tentacles, the cardinals, and were doing their best to show their existence on the battlefields of various countries. Of course, everyone needed free medical care and combat support, but reinforcements that were trying to steal their own military power and sovereignty under the guise of providing reinforcements. I knew that this was a promise from the God of Holy Light. The cardinal who contributed the most to the Holy Light would become a candidate to become the next Pope of Holy Light. Not only that, the cardinal would receive eternal life in his divine kingdom. Although this was tempting enough to motivate these cowardly old cardinals to take action, sometimes acting blindly would be far worse than doing nothing at all. In the game's history, these cardinals would take advantage of the Holy Church's reputation and the fact that Holy Light belief was common in the mortal plane. They would bring their trusted subordinates and personal guards to various battlefields, and then swiftly seize command. After that, they would do whatever they wanted. It would already be a miracle if the minority who knew their own limits didn't randomly give out orders. At most, they would steal all the merits and make you the scapegoat. However, there were even more who thought that they were the reincarnation of the military even though they had never gone to a military academy or read any military books. They would snatch the command right the moment they arrived and give out inconceivable decisions, easily giving away the battles they had won. The defeat of Xyza, who left his fortress and ambushed the undead army in the wilderness. The calamity of Amor, who led his 4 main knight squadrons and advanced 1,400 kilometers. He went in and out of the demon's territory several times, but didn't prepare any reinforcements. The tragedy of Finn, who led the Holy Light Church to open the city gates and block the Beastman army. He angrily denounced the evil Beastmen and preached to them, hoping that the Beastmen would convert to the Holy Light. However, the Beastmen beheaded the Beastmen and slaughtered the entire city. The names in the game's history weren't the locations of the defeats. Instead, they were the names of the cardinals and cardinals who did such foolish things. They used another method to achieve eternity. They had indeed left their names in history. Of course, the human countries that had paid the tuition fee to the Holy Church finally shed all pretenses of cordiality. Since they couldn't openly reject the Holy Church, they could only find excuses to avoid the Holy Church's interference. They began to either openly or secretly reject the Holy Church's interference. In the end, they even directly shed all pretenses of cordiality and forcefully resisted the Holy Church's interference. The Holy Church's repeated failures caused the Holy Church's reputation to take a heavy blow. However, the Holy Church's initial painful lesson was irreversible. The current situation was already far better than it had been in the game's history. The Holy Church wasn't as powerful as it had been in the past. Even the cardinals knew that times had changed, so they would probably restrain themselves slightly. This would probably reduce the number of such man-made disasters. That's right, There would definitely still be man-made calamities. The cardinals who desired eternity and the position of supreme pontiff would definitely be unwilling to remain silent. They would definitely do something. Even if some countries rejected them, there would always be regions and kingdoms with strong faith in the holy light that would be accepted. All in all, the situation was much better than in the game's history. The biggest difference was that the underground faction didn't counterattack, nor did the humans experience cruel civil wars. The elemental war's casualties were also within an acceptable range, so it could be said that everyone was happy. The Holy Church had also lost its supreme authority, which was the most delightful reality of all. However, there were also good and bad things. Although Cynthia had been eliminated, the pitiful ending of total annihilation was avoided. This also broke the cycle of the Holy War on a different level. Without the will of the Chaos Abyss controlling the Chaos Abyss, it was likely that the Chaos Abyss would explode with its most terrifying power. Of course, I had already done everything that I could. Things had already developed far better than I had expected. This world didn't belong to me alone. I still believed in the tenacity of the humans, elves, beast men, and other species. I believed that they would be able to survive this calamity. Even if I didn't believe in them, there was nothing I could do. This world was far too large. Nobody would be able to take care of everything when faced with the entire world's flames of war. During the day, I would grind monsters on the battlefield, and at night, I would cram on magical knowledge. Although my improvement was quite obvious, I was still unable to break through my bottleneck. What made me rather happy was that my old acquaintances had come to visit me. Diana, Victoria, it's been a long time. Momo, it's been a long time. The two who appeared before me were the current higher-ups of the Dark Elves. Victoria was the highest-ranked priestess in the church, and Diana was the highest-ranked military commander. They were both old acquaintances of mine. From a certain standpoint, their arrival was only natural. As the reconstruction of the Elven Empire progressed, the Dark Elves, as one of the 4 major superior elf species, would need to express their intentions and communicate with each other. Rather than looking for my clone empress, who was constantly running around in circles, it would be far better to look for me and the lazy cat on my head. If one only looked at their physical appearances, the 3 of them wouldn't have changed at all. After all, 7 or 8 years was only a short amount of time for the Dark Elves. However, the auras of the 3 of them had changed greatly. Victoria's appearance was still astonishingly beautiful and radiant. However, her previous gentleness had vanished without a trace. Her expression was calm, and her light white priestess robe seemed simple and plain. However, the divine power contained within it was incredibly frightening. She still had a handsome and quiet appearance, and her beautiful eyes seemed to contain a natural might. As the true ruler of the Dark Elves, she was becoming more and more like a matriarch of the Dark Elves. Diana was much calmer than before. Her long hair was tied up in a single ponytail. Although it was obvious that she was happy, she wasn't overly excited. She only nodded slightly at me when she saw me. Her black armor was the simplest model, and the adamantine heavy sword on her back wasn't even enchanted. As she was the teacher of all anti-holy night knights, her arrival caused the elemental tide in the area to naturally decrease. Momo, cough, cough, let's get down to business. I definitely didn't recognize this dark elf who was staring at me and shouting harvest season, and Her Highness Renee isn't bad at all. She's also a mature version of herself. It was likely that she had changed the least out of all the dark elves, both internally and externally. The past few years hadn't left any traces on her at all. When acquaintances met, it was only natural for them to talk about the past and the future. Although we had all been subordinates in the past, I was now free of all responsibilities, so there was no need for me to act like a bureaucrat or put on a dignified front. The Dark Elves didn't have any specific missions. They were simply here to talk about the past and prepare for the upcoming Elven Empire. I also learned from them that the current situation in the underground was quite good. Under the control of the 4 underground autarchs, more and more underground residents were successfully migrating to the Northlands. However, what made me feel rather helpless was that no matter how much they wanted to see the sun and the ocean again, no matter how certain they were, at least 70% of the residents requested to return to the underground the next year. The sky is so scary. I feel like I'm going to fall into the sky at any moment. The wind is so scary. There are at least several dozen different species and magical beasts in the air. I don't feel safe at all. It's so cold. The underground is much warmer. There were all sorts of strange reasons. In the end, it was already good enough that only 1 out of 3 people would be able to migrate to the underground. As more and more people migrated, the underground residents learned the truth. The legendary surface world wasn't as beautiful as they imagined it to be, and their own world might not be so bad. The number of people requesting to migrate to the underground drastically decreased. Of course, the other side of the decrease in the number of underground residents was that the underground autarchs were doing quite well. The Underground Alliance, which nobody expected to be obeyed for a long time, became the cornerstone of the new generation as the Dark Elves, humans, beast men, and dragons gradually became one. The trade of ores brought in sufficient resources, and the Church of Law made society more stable. It wasn't a crime to eat one's fill and wear one's clothes. This boiling land of exiled people actually began to cool down. The complete alliance of the 4 underground autarchs, along with the constantly patrolling dragons in the sky, caused those with wild ambitions to restrain their ambitions. Those who dared to challenge the entire new underground order were either boorish people who believed themselves infallible or idiots who were eager to die. The underground world, which was becoming more and more peaceful, naturally became more and more suitable for the natives to live and work in peace. Trade brought in large amounts of goods from the surface world, while special products from the underground world could be sold for high prices. Staying in the underground world seemed to be much better than migrating. When their own lives were obviously getting better, people wouldn't consider migrating. Out of the 4 underground species, the underground beastmen migrated the most to the beastmen plains. After all, their own species lived there. Due to the dragons being far too few in number, they still lacked a sense of existence. The Dark Elves, who had abandoned Rose's belief system, wanted to live in peace with the other species and even live together. Although they still needed some time to get used to each other, at the very least, the 2 species wouldn't fight each other the moment they met. Of course, one of the main reasons for this was that the Dark Elf society was gradually abandoning the slavery system. And the busiest and most chaotic of all were the humans of the underground world. They were the largest faction in the underground world to begin with. The underground world, which had the largest population, brought with it a large population. Unlike the other species that were relatively unified, the human city lords of the underground world were similar to the domain lords of the surface world. They were only responsible to themselves and were already used to living in the underground world where they were divided and in theft. It could be said that the human underground autarch, had it the hardest. Just mediating the conflicts between the underground world and the other underground cities took her a lot of effort. I furrowed my brows. This was indeed difficult to deal with. With Sulphur Mountain City's status, it wasn't good for her to suppress the other city lords. The human domain lords were all used to infeffing each other, and if she tried to be a dictator, all the other domain lords would oppose her. If it wasn't for the fact that Anne had a strong backing, she probably wouldn't even be able to keep her position. Looks like I'll have to find a chance to kick that brat Adam out of the underground world and take some responsibility. He's probably had enough of hanging around outside, and it's about time for his vacation to end. Roland. We're back. This was truly the case of mentioning someone and they would come. Adam actually returned first, and before he could even enter, his voice sounded out. Hey, what's this little red bottle? A potion that's the same color as my hair. I'm thirsty, can I drink it? Chapter 697. Wait a moment, don't touch that. That's the spring of the drowned woman. From a certain standpoint, I still had a conscience. If Adam really drank it, not only would Marguerite and Anne not let me off the hook, just thinking about how impactful a female version of Adam would be was something I couldn't handle, so I hurriedly shouted for him to stop. The spring of the drowned woman? A gender replacement potion. However, the one who was the most excited wasn't Adam, who hurriedly tossed aside the bottle. Instead, it was Victoria, who had been maintaining her calm appearance. I paused in surprise for a moment, but then I recalled that back in the day when Collos and Harloys were together, Victoria had probably heard my promise to Collos. Back then, Even if she saw it and was anxious, she couldn't express it. After all, it was Rose, the venerated ruler of the Dark Elves, who had turned him into her. The consequences of attempting to remove the gods' punishment would be the same as defying the will of the gods. The her back then wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Besides, back then, she was still Rose's priestess, which was a privilege reserved for women. In the Dark Elf generation where women were superior to men, it was impossible for her to give up on the status and privileges of being a woman. However, he had lived as a man for the past several centuries, and had only lived as a woman for a few years. Mentally, he had always thought of himself as a man. Now that he heard that there was a chance for him to regain his male identity, he was delighted. "Your Highness Roland, is this for real? You can turn me back into a man? That's wonderful." Victoria immediately came over to me. Her gentle and beautiful face was right in front of me, and her faint rose fragrance had a hypnotic effect. This guy was even more difficult to deal with than before. Behind her, her older sister was looking at me with a pleading expression, as if she was waiting for me to give her an affirmative answer. This won't be easy. It was indeed difficult to refuse an old subordinate's pleading. However, I had already promised Kolos, and she should have arrived by now. That was why I placed the potion on the table. Although Victoria was also quite pitiful, since I had promised her earlier, this is the spring of the drowned woman. It can only turn men into women. The spring of the drowned man can turn women into men. Your Highness Roland, I heard you found the spring of the drowned man. Where is it? Where is it? At this moment, the one who rushed in with an extremely joyful smile, isn't it Kolos who just arrived? Her joy made her flower-like smile even more radiant. The moment the wild elf entered, she continuously giggled at me. I rubbed my head helplessly. Maybe this was fate. System, you really didn't want to trick me on purpose, right? No. Have you forgotten? There are few in this world whose luck value is lower than yours. Do you think that just because their luck is lower than yours, fate will allow them to easily remove the curse? Don't worry. It's the two of them who are doomed, at least for now. Kolos was delighted to see that Victoria was here. The two of them shared the same fate, and they had a good personal relationship. They often wrote to each other and talked about many private matters. Of course, she was happy to see her sister here without any prior arrangements. She then noticed that her sister was looking at her with unfriendly expressions. The wild elf girl's face instantly paled. She realized that the reason why the two of them had such a good relationship was because they shared the same fate. And now, the only antidote was right in front of her. Even if we're sisters, this is the only thing I can't give up. That's right, Sister Kolos. Let's have a fair competition. I felt rather uncomfortable hearing the word fair competition come out of a dark elf's mouth. But soon, I was able to understand what the dark elves meant by fair competition. Your Highness Roland, 200,000 gold coins, 10,000 justice points, and 30 beauties of various species. Please rest assured that this is all my personal property. It's completely legal. If you have any special requests, please let me know. It won't be just money. No matter if it's the beast men of the northern icy plains or the fishmen of the coastline, I'll satisfy them all. All right then, it was quite fair of me to directly bribe me. Meanwhile, Kolos opened her mouth wide with an expression of disbelief. In the end, she was unable to say anything and could only look at me with an expression of wanting to cry. Victoria was the true leader of the Dark Elves. Not only did Dark Elf society have a system of slavery, it also had a theocracy and a system of private ownership. From a certain standpoint, all of Dark Elf society was under her control. Compared to her wealth, Kolos' meager salary was nothing at all. Besides, this potion was my personal property. It was only natural for me to do whatever I wanted with it. Kolos seemed to have noticed the difference in wealth between us. She had an expression of despair as tears silently flowed out of her eyes. Meanwhile, Victoria was looking at me in high spirits as she kept raising the price. I shook my head. This was becoming a farce. I had to say something. I promised Kolos before. Although it was only a verbal promise, I don't have the habit of going back on promises. I'm Harlois, Amelia, Eliza, and the opponents that you screwed over in the past. Are you sure that what you just said is convincing? Don't make things difficult for me. At the very least, I have a good reputation in their eyes. A beauty isn't moved. When have you ever been able to resist the temptation of money? Haven't you been so poor recently that you're even writing IOUs for food? TMPH, you're looking down on me too much. Fine then, stop laughing at me through our soul connection. I admit that I'm slightly moved. If she had secretly discussed it with me, I might have considered it. But if I agreed so openly, wouldn't I be labeled as greedy and lecherous? Human society isn't dark elf society. If I have a bad reputation, it'll be quite troublesome to do many things. I took out the red potion and was about to directly hand it to Kolos, who was crying tears of joy. Victoria's face instantly paled, but she was powerless to do anything. But at this moment, Diana came over. She knelt down on one knee and raised her head to beg me. Your Highness Roland, I only have this one younger brother. I'm begging you, I'm willing to pay anything in exchange for your generosity. Please give my younger brother a chance to be a man out of consideration for all the hard work I've done for you for so many years. P2E, what did she mean by asking me to give her a chance to be a man? If word got out, wouldn't people think that I was a pervert who lusted after men? The guards outside were already secretly peeking at us. Are you all going to be unhappy until you ruin my reputation? I became even angrier, but I really couldn't reprimand this female knight who had always been so loyal to me. Victoria seemed to have discovered that I was amenable to persuasion but not coercion, so she immediately knelt down as well. She even went one step further and hugged my right leg as she wailed loudly. Your Highness, I'm so pitiful, truly pitiful. Nobody can understand my pain for so many years. Under Victoria's gaze, Diana was still unable to hug Victoria's thigh. But when Momo saw this situation, she pounced on Diana like a bird. Not only did she hug Victoria's left thigh, but she also rubbed her head against Victoria's thigh and muttered some strange words. What an amazing touch. Touch, touch, pinch, lick, young lady. What happened to your honor as a knight? Even if you don't have any bottom line, you should at least have some moral integrity. Don't, drool, drool. I wouldn't show any mercy to Momo at all. I unhesitatingly kicked out with my left foot, but I wasn't able to pull my leg away. Instead, she kept rubbing against me. When I reached a critical point, I felt a chill crawl up my back from my heels to my spine. I took a deep breath and smiled. Momo saw me smile and smiled back. Then, she froze. My left leg and Momo's were frozen together, but it was already much more comfortable than before. I silently pulled my right leg out from Victoria's grasp and limped over to a chair before silently sitting down. Asterisk thud. 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 Asterisk the sound of my ice-dark elf knight crashing against the floor echoed far into the distance. Momo was still giggling foolishly inside the ice. Everyone wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. Although having a block of ice and a dark elf knight on my leg was rather embarrassing, my anger still made me seem rather dignified in front of my former subordinates. Where's that brat Shueti? Didn't I tell him to come? Kolos wiped away her tears and shook her head. He came. He heard about the spring of the drowned man and said that he wanted to go to the volcano to soak in the hot springs. He said that he'd come back to see your highness after a while. That sly bastard. He's clearly a bull, but why is he so sly? It would seem that the spring of the drowned man had already alerted Shueti, so he sent Kolos to scout ahead. This was going to be quite troublesome. But right now, I didn't have the time to care about the bull. Even though it was clearly their misfortune, why did it suddenly become my misfortune? Just what did I do to deserve this? Both of them have super negative luck. You're no better off. Misfortune will only summon even more misfortune. Since they're together, it's only natural that everyone around them will suffer misfortune. You're just an innocent victim. I felt rather helpless as I kept feeling like the two bottles in my hands were hot potatoes. I didn't really care about anything else. I wouldn't care too much about what Victoria and Momo thought. However, not only was Diana an honest person, she had truly given her all for my career and helped me gain a lot of fame. This was the first time that she had ever begged me, and she was even willing to give up everything she had. If I refused, not only would my other subordinates be bitterly disappointed, I would also feel quite bad about it. This was what it meant when it was easy to bully smart people. However, if you wanted to bully honest people, you'd have to go through yourself first. You guys can discuss it among yourselves. Tell me the final result. In the end, I could only play the ball. But soon, I regretted my decision to stall for time. That very night, a dark elf snuck into my bedroom. Not only that, she was the most beautiful dark elf in all of dark elf society. My dear Prince Roland, for that, I'm willing to give up everything that's most precious to me. I know that you have high standards, but I, the Queen of Darkness of the Dark Elves, am the best tribute to my species. I can satisfy all of your desires. The young girl trembled as she took off her clothes. The moment she revealed her fragrant shoulders, I kicked her away with an awkward expression. I'm not interested in men, even if I'm mentally male. I'm not gay. And then, the next night, Diana arrived. I tried my best to persuade the female knight who had an expression of resolution to sacrifice herself, but I was unable to convince her to leave. She was like an ancient tree that had taken root there. She was the strongest anti-holy knight in the entire world. Even I had no way of dealing with her. But fortunately, she was an honest person. She was difficult to convince but easy to trick. In the end, we talked about the spirit of law and the knight's faith for an entire night, successfully making her forget about the mission that her younger brother had given her. Finally, she yawned and walked out of my room under everyone's ambiguous gazes. On the third day, I was only half asleep when I was woken up by a scream outside my door. I saw that Momo had activated a lightning trap, so I had Harlois cast a soundproof barrier on the door before I turned around and continued sleeping. I even had a good dream. However, the result was the scariest. It was said that Momo screamed for half the night. She was screaming for the first half of the night, but she became quite strange in the second half. During dinner, she even excitedly said that she had awakened a new interest, and was even drooling as she talked. She even talked about the feeling of His Highness Roland's thighs. My reputation was completely ruined. Another result of my reputation being ruined was that on the fourth night, Crosa, who was trembling uncontrollably, walked in wearing a thin white veil, hoping to make up for what had happened. And then, I spent half the night explaining everything to Crosa and comforting her as she couldn't stop crying. When she finally calmed down, I sent her out. And then, the guards saw me carrying a crying Kolos. Even though I hadn't done anything, at that moment, I really had the urge to kill them to silence them. On the second day, fine then, I was now the rumored elven hunter. I was truly wronged. Chapter 698. Roland's unfailing law of luck stated that when two unlucky individuals were together, a third unlucky individual would soon appear. In order to not become the third unlucky individual, I chose the wisest way to deal with this situation. I've left the potion here. You guys can decide who needs it. I'm going out for a stroll. That's right, I ran away. I had never run away before, but this time, I was truly afraid. I ran away, not only because I was afraid of the fire elementalists and the increasingly exaggerated rumors, but also because of my own personal law of luck. If I got too close, the unluckiest person would most likely be me. And if I got too unlucky this time, I would actually be quite happy to watch Kolos and Victoria have some fun, but it would be a tragedy if I personally did it. As for Princess Peach, Renee would continue to be the scapegoat. If I run away, at least the potion won't splash on me. If anyone else gets unlucky, TSK, it's fine as long as I'm not the unlucky one. I'll even be able to laugh at them. It seemed that we had come to a mutual understanding. No matter how things developed, Victoria and Kolos would have an incredibly low chance of succeeding. I unhesitatingly stepped into the fire elemental plane. I wouldn't be so unlucky if I went to another plane. I also needed time to polish up my combat techniques so that I could break through as soon as possible. Separation blade. I reached out with my hands and took a deep breath. What I blew out were countless shards of ice blades. Endless ice blades devoured everything before me. Any creature that walked too slowly, no matter if it was a lava giant or a fire elemental, would be sliced into pieces by these ice blades. Meanwhile, the fire lizards suddenly crawled out of the sea of lava in front of me. Due to their militarized society, the fire lizards were either armed with spears or shields. There were more than 30 of them in an ambush formation waiting for their prey. This was actually a small army. Double tornado. With a sudden wave of my hand, the spell model that I had prepared beforehand was activated. With me as the core, 2 ice tornadoes collided with each other and tore at each other. Every living creature within a 30-meter radius of the tornado was struck and frozen by the ice tornadoes. The extreme cold of the snowstorm instantly turned the fire lizards into lizard ice. The flames on their heads and backs were extinguished, which meant that these half-elemental, half-physical creatures had died. There were still a few high-level fire king lizards that were struggling at death's door in the cold. Fish. Before they could scream for reinforcements, ice arrows pierced through their foreheads, taking away the last of their lives. With a wave of my hand, the ice bow and arrow vanished into thin air. Now, there was nothing left around me. I had already cleared out the small fries, but the magma pool in front of me was still bubbling and giving off a fiery aura. That was probably the fire elemental plane. This spatial node was still summoning fire creatures. It would take a lot of time and effort to dispel the spatial node of such an elemental plane using conventional spatial magic. However, I knew that there was another way to dispel the elemental door other than using the key. Judgment of the Glacier. Above my head was a battle hammer of ice. It kept growing larger and larger, and when it finally completely covered my head, I directly let it descend. The huge glacier collided with the lava, and boiling steam was everywhere. The elements of ice and fire collided with each other. When everything calmed down, the lava pool had also become a pond. The surrounding temperature began to rapidly decrease. This fire elemental plane node had already been sealed off. No matter how it functioned, it was definitely supported by the fire element. In that case, all I had to do was use the ice element, which countered the fire element. Of course, the extinguishing of the fire element here wouldn't have any substantial effect. The entire fire elemental plane was already connected to the mortal plane, and there were hundreds and thousands of other nodes still in operation. Ever since I started to clear out this elemental node, I had been using ice magic from the very beginning. The final solution was also a standard mage's way of thinking. From a certain standpoint, Harloise's force-feeding method of teaching had indeed been effective. Her functional classification was indeed to my liking. With her help, my ice magic was finally standardized and systematic. It was just that, the blade of separation is tossing ice blades, and the judgment of the glacier is creating a ball of ice to smash down. Do I really have to say these names? It's so Chunibya and so embarrassing. Of course. Spell names aren't just a self-suggestion from the spellcaster to increase the modularity of the spellcasting effect. They're also the symbol of your systematic spellcasting ability. If your spell list is filled with all sorts of nameless spells, how are you supposed to combine them and create a major spell? Don't even mention that messy ice eon spell. That's not magic at all. With Harloi's help, my ice magic improved by leaps and bounds. However, the biggest change was still the change in my combat style. The division between ice magic and snow magic allowed me to understand my own power system. From the very start, since I was an expert in martial arts, I should have walked down the path of ice magic, which was more suitable for magical martial arts. The core idea of ice magic was to create all sorts of ice weapons that could be used to kill enemies. Ice spears, ice arrows, ice swords, ice shields, ice hammers, and so on. I was also used to using these weapons in battle to kill enemies. My ice swords, which were several dozen meters long, were indeed much more comfortable to use than my toothpicks. The only part that I was still unable to get used to was the rather embarrassing names that Harlois had given me. Compared to ordinary ice mags, their ice magic spell models were rigid and lacked flexibility. They were far less flexible than me. When I used them, it was as if there was a giant behind me brandishing an ice weapon to show off his martial arts. Meanwhile, the ice mags were simply tossing out simple and crude spell models. It didn't seem like much of a difference, but on the battlefield, the difference was quite obvious. It was like the difference between a veteran professional and a newbie commoner. And compared to my past self, forget it, let's not talk about it. Back then, I couldn't even compare to ordinary ice mags. As for the environmental type of ice magic that mainly used low temperatures to kill enemies, I had only mastered the spell models for Ice Tornado, Avalanche, Hailstorm, and other common ice and snow calamities. Part of this was to increase my combat strength, but more importantly, it was for the sake of making preparations for leveling up. Perhaps this was the difference between those who were trained in magic and those who didn't. The difference didn't seem that great, but the further one progressed, the greater the difference in performance on the battlefield. Over the past few days, although there hadn't been any foundational difference in my magic power, the current me was confident that I could defeat 10 of the past me if I only looked at ice magic. In the past, my ability to use magic had been far too crude. My method of gathering magic elements and then tossing them out naturally caused more than half of my magic power to be wasted. My crude attack method made it even more difficult for these ice swords to directly attack. Now that I had a solid foundation, leveling up didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. Chapter 699. The Northland's magic sword was the most unique of my 4 magic swords. Ice magic was the weakest of my 4 elemental powers, and the Northland's magic sword's design was also the simplest. In fact, it didn't even require too many materials. Since it's the Northland's incarnation of ice magic sword, I only need the Northland's endless ice and snow. I admit that I was trying to save some time, but from a design standpoint, this seemingly cheap material was the most suitable. This time, it's a snowstorm. I reached out my hand, causing countless snowflakes to descend. A gentle snowstorm covered the entire land. The endless snowflakes seemed beautiful, but were actually incredibly fatal. All fire creatures within the range of the snowstorm were affected by the low temperature and gradually lost their most basic life force. Meanwhile, a large club made of ice crystals appeared in my hand. That's right, this was a large ice crystal club that was more than 2 meters long. Judging from the model, it was obvious that the ogres would use it. The moment it appeared, it almost crushed me. Clang. However, under the fierce impact, cracks appeared all over the lava giant's body. It trembled and collapsed, returning to its elemental source. This was already the 3rd ice elemental lord that I had hunted down. From a certain standpoint, this myth-ranked weapon of ice was basically the natural enemy of fire elemental creatures. Suddenly, the snow stopped. Next, a layer of white frost appeared on the ground, covering all life as water froze into ice. Life swiftly came to an end. Fire wall. Fortunately, the silly cat on top of my head reacted quickly enough. She instantly ignited a wall of fire that dispelled the frost, allowing us to survive. Meanwhile, the ogre ice crystal club in my hand transformed into a short sword that was less than half a meter long. The ice crystal was transparent, and there seemed to be something hidden within it. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that there were cracks on the ice crystal. The cracks continued to expand until the entire ice blade completely shattered. Clang. This was the sound of a mirror shattering. All the ice and snow in the world disappeared with this sound as everything returned to the scorching land of fire. How many times has it been transformed? The 4th time. At most 4 times. It's still far from completion. Also, are you unable to find a pattern to the natural disasters? Didn't I already say that the Northland's natural disasters have no pattern at all? If there's no pattern to speak of, what's your advantage? Is being killed by your own weapon something to brag about? No, I'm confident that I can outlast my opponents in the Northern Reach's natural calamity. Heloise opened her mouth, but in the end, she gave up on preaching. The magic sword Northland's had always been an automatic method of summoning Calamity Armageddon to begin with. With Harloy's assistance, the details of the sword Northland's had been improved. However, the foundational design concept hadn't changed at all. This sword's special effects were divided into 2 parts. The first part was to randomly create a natural disaster environment in the Northlands, forcefully transforming the environment into a polar battlefield. This was my personal domain that I was most proficient in. In a way, from a design standpoint, this magic sword was the best replacement for my soul world. Ice and snow calamity would change over time. Each time it changed, the original ice and snow mana would be extracted and reused, doubling the power of the original ice and snow mana. Conservation's theoretical results. The other reason was probably the only special privilege I had in this region, which was to randomly create an ice and snow weapon for me. The ice and snow weapon's power level was probably above that of an ordinary myth-ranked weapon. The only way to close this place was to destroy the ice crystal weapon that was the core of the natural disaster. No matter if it was me or the enemy, this was the only way out. This magic sword special effect is to create an environment that's advantageous for me to fight to the death. Simply speaking, this was like an arena of ice and snow. If the enemy didn't want to die to the endless ice and snow calamity, they would have to try to kill me and destroy my weapon. Otherwise, they would sooner or later die to the ever-strengthening ice and snow calamity. And with the ice and snow calamity, how much combat strength would the enemy be able to maintain? This would naturally greatly increase my chances of victory. This magic sword was the main function of my soul world. It's so rare to see a myth-ranked weapon that's even capable of harming itself. Everyone is equal before the ice and snow calamity. If one doesn't have this resolution, their power will be greatly reduced. Soul worlds also followed the most basic rules. The more privileged a soul world was, the weaker it would be. This meant that the soul world's creator lacked self-knowledge and self-confidence. Soul worlds that were equal to both the enemy and me would typically be stronger. This magic sword was still incomplete. Currently, I could only summon 3 types of ice and snow calamities: blizzard, frost, and hailstorm. Not only that, I could only change the ice and snow calamities 4 times at most before it would collapse. I was still far from being a complete magic sword. Previously, I had tried painting and ice sculpting in order to deepen my impression of the ice and snow calamity so that I could replicate it in my soul world. This was also why I didn't need any high-level materials. The ice and snow calamity was the Northlands to begin with. Only by using the Northlands ice and snow as paint would my oil painting be more realistic and have more attack power. Harlois's system of ice magic greatly increased my construction speed. After combining ice magic with ice magic, the ice and snow weapons I created would be much more powerful. Although I would still often use comical weapons such as clubs and toy hammers, they would still be quite powerful. The ice and snow calamity realm combined with conservation's low-temperature energy circulation theory would gradually accumulate and increase the ice and snow calamity's attack power. The ice and snow calamity realm was so powerful that even I found it difficult to withstand it. How long can you last if you go all out? Judging from the current situation, it'll collapse in less than half an hour. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking how long you're confident you can survive in the ice and snow calamity realm after your magic sword is completed. You've already seen the most fatal part of the ice and snow calamity realm. The ice and snow calamity's power is like a rolling snowball, and the constant low temperature will be fatal to me. If I can maintain this level of power, I'll definitely die within 5 hours. If I encounter the most fatal types of ice and snow calamity at the very beginning, it's even possible for me to instantly die. What a great suicidal weapon, I won't deny it, but I'll do my best to survive longer than the Northlands ice and snow calamity realm. After all, there's no one more experienced than me when it comes to dealing with the Northlands ice and snow calamity realm. According to my design theory, I would need to create at least 10 different types of ice and snow calamity realm, as well as solidify and increase the power of my ice weapons. All of this would require time and ice magic. This was also why the Fire Elemental Lords had been having such bad luck recently. The Fire Elemental Lord's spoils of war had all become nourishment for my magic sword Northlands, which it devoured bit by bit. But judging from the current situation, it would still take some time before it could completely break through. That's quite fast already. You easily broke through to semigod. Easily? Alright, don't glare at me. I know that compared to you, a 10,000-year-old myth rank, breaking through to semigod is much easier. Right, Harlois, have you finished designing your myth-ranked weapon? Heh, take a guess. I shook my head and gave up on this pointless guessing game. Harlois had accumulated far too much, and I had no idea what her choices would be. I had rested enough and gathered ice in my hand. A new ice and snow calamity was about to descend, causing the entire ground to shake. This time, I was challenging an avalanche. Little insect, Lasdir has found you. You actually dared to kill the fire elemental lord's brother? You're dead meat. A lava giant came out of the ground, transforming the entire ground into a pool of lava. Ice and fire clashed once again. Alright then, it would seem that the ice and snow calamities I created weren't the first to arrive. There was no need to look for the fire elemental lord anymore. He had come to me of his own volition. Chapter 700. During the new year, I traveled southward, enjoying the warmth of spring and blooming flowers. That would be the truth if I had to beat my brains out. Whenever I went to a new area, I would find that there was either a war going on, or they were preparing for war. They would either be gathering their armies for defense, or they had already sent out all their forces. A new year after the demon wave's eruption came the news that the entire world was engulfed in the flames of war. Large-scale dimensional invasions were happening, and demon lords had finished gathering. Every news source was about war, and the Holy Church was exhausted. Yet, I was on vacation. Yep, I had indeed searched everywhere for traces of Cavendish, but I couldn't find any better clues. No matter if it was the Thieves' Guild, the Adventurers' Guild, or even the fairies that were everywhere, they were unable to provide me with the most direct information. I even tried to make a deal with the dark cultists. They communicated with the demon lords and evil gods, but all I learned was that Cavendish and his trusted aides had mysteriously disappeared. Since I was traveling with my sister-in-law, I wasn't as free as before. At the very least, I had to prepare a comfortable carriage for the pregnant lady. Of course, her physical appearance wasn't that obvious, and it didn't affect her movements. She even insisted on riding her own horse. But in the end, I succeeded in making her lie down in the carriage. On a moonless night, I achieved my goal and dissected her. At the very least, she didn't discover anything the next morning, so let's pretend that this never happened. Her bloodline was normal, and the tiny amount of divine power was negligible. Her physical body was normal, and her muscle strength and internal organs were acceptable. Her reproductive status was good, and her fetus was normal. She was expected to give birth in 9 months. Since I had already dissected her, I might as well do an examination. I was far more skilled than those doctors. Her soul. Currently, I hadn't found anything special about her. If I wanted to dissect her and examine her further, it would be quite difficult to restore her. For now, my final conclusion was that she was nothing more than an ordinary divine bloodline. She was nothing more than someone with great willpower, some talent, courage, and good luck. She was completely different from those geniuses who were blessed by the heavens and had everything go according to their wishes. As for her reincarnation as a god or demon, I didn't discover any other soul divinity apart from Sylvan. She was a rather unique descendant of a divine bloodline. If I had to force myself, she's just an ordinary hardworking person. Did I really make a mistake this time? Since I had no confidence in restoring her after dissecting her, I could only helplessly carry her around. However, after spending some time with her, my impression of her had greatly improved. At first, I thought that this girl was another silly girl who had been tricked by Cavendish. She had big breasts and no brains. She had some strength, but her EQ and IQ were lacking. However, she gradually used her words and actions to reshape my impression of her. I personally believe that the true value of a god's existence is to guide people to do good. At the very least, compared to empty moral preaching, the noble's final concern of having no divine kingdoms willing to accept them after death will always be the lowest moral limit. As a saintess, her understanding of religion was rare. Perhaps you've misunderstood the teachings of lightning and swords. Our Lord ascended to godhood with his swordsmanship. He was a pure swordsman. He had always taught us to work hard in cultivation, to be self-reliant, and to use a healthy body to carry a healthy soul. Wow, he's really a religious person, actually preaching to me. I've read your works. Many of your views have touched me deeply. I've known you for a long time, and I've always wanted to meet you. I didn't expect that when we really met, it would be like this. Leona gently rubbed her stomach with a sad expression. However, I was hesitating. Aren't you going to ask your fan which book she's reading when you meet her? That's too scary. I don't dare to ask. I was rendered speechless by Harloy's comment. I had written far too many random things, so I didn't dare to ask. It would have been fine if it had been a normal book about pure holy light religion, Hades, or the power of judgment. It would have been fine if it had been a reference book about gold robbers. However, if it had been an 6 p.m. story about chivalry or swordsmen. I thought back to that female-focused harem that I had written to scam royalties, as well as the male protagonist who had all sorts of miraculous adventures and romantic encounters. I decided to just let those stories be buried in my dark history. Not only that, she had her own opinions on military and politics. She could even talk about the situation in Ike. That was quite impressive. This wasn't like Earth, where information was abundant. She had to actively gather information. Being able to casually talk about such things meant that she was paying attention to them. It was truly difficult for her to be able to do this under the dual restrictions of being a religious person and a woman. That was why I was rather curious as to how she had been conquered by Cavendish in just one short month. Don't tell me that you fell in love at first sight. You're just a wily old fox. Why are you pretending to be pure? You're already at the Grandmaster level. After several decades of experience, I've seen all sorts of men. I've seen plenty of playboys with silver tongues. Swordsmanship. My insinuations only resulted in such an answer. My master's personal experience says that the sword is like the person. Swordsmanship comes from the heart. The sword is straight, and the heart is straight, and then, I more or less understood. She was yet another person who had been scammed by her father. Her father scammed her. It was enough to hear such chicken soup for life. There was no point in saying things like the sword is like the person or words are like the person. Wasn't Chin Hui the creator of the famous calligrapher song style? Couldn't those bastards who committed murder and arson become sword saints? Leona became rather annoyed when she saw that I didn't care at all. She forced me to spar with her. Originally, I was just playing around, but I discovered that my opponent's swordsmanship was truly excellent. She had been a sword saint for at least 7 or 8 years. And so, I became slightly more serious as well. When considering Leona's current condition, it would be too much to use physical strength to bully her. I only showed her pure swordsmanship and stopped there. Even so, Leona's sword was sent flying in 23 seconds, and this was the result of me going easy on her. If I had been serious, 3 sword strikes would have been more than enough. Leona found this result rather unbelievable. She had an expression of astonishment as she gripped her sword. When I proudly looked at Leona and was about to give her junior some pointers, Leona suddenly sighed. Your Highness Roland, you probably don't have any luck with women. Normal people definitely wouldn't be able to tolerate your personality. Fat. Well said. Roland, you're just taking out your anger on me. I'll be back. I instantly tossed away the silly cat who was snickering on my head. Her screams still lingered in the air. Wasn't this basically cursing me? However, it would be far too ungentlemanly of me to argue about this with a junior. I'm not angry. I did my best to take a deep breath and then force a smile. However, Leona seemed to have seen something terrifying as she was so frightened that she took 2 steps back. But soon, she calmed down and explained. Judging from the personality displayed in his swordsmanship, Ron, Cavendish is the complete opposite of you. Although your swordsmanship is beyond the comprehension of ordinary people, there are actually 2 other people in the world who have such swordsmanship. I wonder how it compares to the Red Lotus Sword Saint and the Dancing Phoenix Sword Saint. Cough, cough. Leona's face flushed red when she talked about swordsmanship. She had an excited expression as if she was a young girl in love. She talked endlessly. I coughed lightly and finally brought her back to her senses. I'm sorry, that bastard's swordsmanship feels like the starry sky. You'll never know what he's thinking or where his swordsmanship came from. However, his swordsmanship has its own system. It's completely natural and pure. It's even purer and more dazzling than the endless starry sky. Cough, cough. I was now certain that this girl wasn't a fan of mine. She was a fan of Cavendish. I'm sorry, perhaps you won't believe me, but I can indeed sense that person's personality from his swordsmanship. Although that bastard lied to me, he's a sincere person. His sword and heart are both pure. As long as he wants to do something, he'll do it. Nothing can stop him. He loves this world more than anyone else. His purity and sensibility are really attractive. Cough, cough. I was doing my best to bring back my senses as a fan. It was no wonder that Leona would fall into a fan mode. If she kept coughing like this, I would need some throat candy. His swordsmanship comes from his instincts and his heart. It's a display of his nature. Your swordsmanship is purely man-made. Leona sunk into a confused state as she spoke. However, her previous flush was different from that of a young girl in love. Now, she was filled with undisguised disgust. Every sword attack is based on basic swordsmanship. Every sword attack is restricted by countless rules. Every sword attack is calculated. Aren't you tired? Ha 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 ha. I turned around and then kicked the silly cat, who had returned at some point and was now rolling on the ground. Although the basics of swordsmanship are to see through the enemy's weaknesses and use their strengths to counter their weaknesses, you're probably the only person in the world who can do this. You perfectly follow the rules and perfectly force your opponent to make mistakes. You're so perfect that it's nauseating. Leona's mouth really did twitch twice. It seemed that she really wanted to vomit. I understood now. Leona was truly a sword maniac. She actually vomited. This was probably morning sickness. It had nothing to do with me. I wasn't angry at all, really. However, I wasn't satisfied with her next explanation. Let's just dissect her. The sword is like the person. With such swordsmanship, you must be incredibly self-centered. You're so self-centered that you ignore all existing rules in the world. You're so arrogant that you're willing to follow the rules that you set. You're so stubborn that you believe that the world should operate according to your rules. You're just like a tyrant. Yes, a tyrant. That's it. A natural-born tyrant. You rule with extreme arrogance. You're so self-centered. How can any normal woman tolerate such a personality? I glanced at the silly cat by my feet. She was currently holding up a 10-point sign. She seemed to be quite satisfied with Leona's evaluation. My mouth was twitching. Why did it sound like Cavendish was on the side of justice, while I was the villain? I'm clearly a good person. My muttering was so low that even I didn't believe it. Actually, it's quite accurate. If you and Cavendish switched places back in the day, and he became a holy knight, while you fought against demons, perhaps it would be Abyss Prince Roland and the strongest holy knight, Cavendish. And, you'd probably be even more outstanding, wouldn't you? The sly and vicious demon lord and the sunny son of holy light. The silly cat unhesitatingly added insult to injury. I didn't owe you cat food, did I? But, such hypotheticals are meaningless to begin with. Personality is personality, and standpoint is standpoint. Do you regret standing here right now? Perhaps I would feel sad when looking back at the past, but regret. Every step I took was by myself, and I gave it my all. What was there to regret? Regret? What a joke. If you ask Cavendish this question, he'll probably say the same thing. Since you don't regret it, then what's the point of worrying about such things? I nodded, but then shook my head. He hasn't evolved to the point where he knows what regret is. But right now, I really hope that he will regret it. Chapter 701. In order to successfully become a level 4 semigod, I'm going to go to the south to find some peace. Cough cough, I mean to go to a certain place in the south to find the sun god's magic realm. So, don't wait for me to go home for dinner. I unhesitatingly left my home after saying these rather confusing words. At the very least, I needed to find a place to calm down before the berserk Renee calmed down. Of course, before I left, I needed to perform a magical ritual. In the extreme northlands, the entire sky was lit up by holy light. The dark clouds that covered the sky were actually a vortex of shadow elements. The elemental tide surged like a storm. Every single magic tower in the northlands could sense the rampaging elemental waves. However, no matter what kind of detection spell they used, they were unable to see through this area. Obviously, this was a forbidden magic ritual. What if I get exposed after making such a big fuss? At the center of the elemental waves, archmages who should have been chanting forbidden spells were instead drinking tea and chatting. Meanwhile, The floating city in midair was still spitting out death canopy and holy light. Precious mana resources were being used to set off meaningless fireworks. It would have been strange if the elemental waves were normal. It'll be a problem if I don't make such a big fuss. I could understand Swanna's anxiety. However, explaining this would be quite a headache. Miracles can't be too cheap. That's right, it was that simple. Miracles couldn't be too cheap. If it were so easy to perform a miracle of resurrection, I would likely be torn to shreds by countless believers. Not only that, none of the gods who believed in me would let me off the hook. In this generation, 99.9% of the gods believed in me. Apart from social customs, it was even more because of the gods' teachings that devout believers would enter the divine kingdom, while non-believers would fall into the river Styx. Fear of death and the world after death was a human instinct. It was also the foundation of belief in the gods. If resurrection could be carried out at will, and humans could obtain eternal life, or if the gods used another method to prove that the world after death didn't exist, then there would be no real difference between belief and not believing in the gods. It was likely that a tremendous number of believers would instantly abandon their belief in the gods. More than half of the gods who believed in the gods would instantly perish, and the other gods would also be greatly weakened. That was why all civilizations and individuals that sought eternal life and resurrection were suicidal. Even I, who was already used to being suicidal, wasn't directly strangled to death. That was because I had two ridiculous restrictions: only natural undead can resurrect after death, and resurrection requires a tremendous price that I wouldn't be hunted down by the gods. Of course, it was also because my life was tough enough. If it was anyone else who announced that they had the power of resurrection, even if it was a limited power of resurrection, the gods would instantly send that person into the river Styx. The black power of death was in his right hand, and the golden holy light was in his left. With a light pat, they turned into sparkling white light. Eat it and you'll be resurrected. So easy. I shook my head and didn't reply. Easy. Casting a resurrection spell would only take an instant, but researching how to resurrect would take an entire history book. How many years would it take to simultaneously master undead magic and the power of holy light? And as the user, not only would she have to ensure the success rate of resurrection, she would also have to surpass me in the study of souls. Perhaps my system was cheating as well. Although only natural undead can be resurrected was a pure lie, the second condition I mentioned wasn't completely a lie. Resurrection indeed required a price. Casting a resurrection spell also required a magic ingredient, souls. That's right, it was an equivalent exchange. In order to resurrect a dead person, one would need to pay 100 or even 1,000 times more souls. Back when Harlois was revived, the technology wasn't perfect enough yet. She had used my divine sin soul, my soul-related magical pet. Not only did it allow her to transform from an undead into a living being, it even made up for her soul's flaws. To put it in simpler terms, it cured her mental illness. Cough, cough, let me pull the cat off my head before I continued. It was getting more and more painful. Could it be that Harlois had evolved her adamantine fangs? The living and the undead didn't seem very different, but there was actually a foundational difference. The undead were the remnants of the living. No matter how the undead evolved, the foundational nature of the undead soul would only become weaker and weaker. Forcefully devouring souls to evolve would only cause the undead soul to be mixed with too much impurities, and the undead would become completely unrecognizable. This type of desire caused by the lack of a soul would cause the undead to become lonelier and crazier. For the wild undead, no matter how noble their reason for becoming an undead was, if they forcefully tried to survive, they would often end up forgetting the true reason for their pursuit of eternal life after a long period of time. They would truly become the walking dead. A strong will and desire for glory could slow down this process. It would be fine for several hundred years, but thousands or even tens of thousands of years would cause the soul's deterioration to be irreversible. As for the living, before reaching the end of their lifespan, they would always be changing and evolving. They would be active, unpredictable, and self-sufficient. They would be on an upward curve. Knowledge and the elements would become their nourishment, helping them to continuously grow and mature. Only when they reached the end of their lifespan would they become completely fixed, and then enter a downward curve. As for the secret art of resurrection, it actually used the principles of pure holy light to purify and restore the undead soul shards as a template to restore the full appearance of the living soul. Then, using undead magic's ability to manipulate souls, I would use high-quality soul shards from the living to make up for and reconstruct the undead soul. That's right, resurrection was the twin miracles of holy light and death. It was a simulation of the cycle of reincarnation created by the creator goddesses. It was also a cheating method to preserve the memories of the soul. From a certain standpoint, I had stolen the authority that only the goddesses of order and chaos should have. This was a byproduct of my research on the creation of the world of Hades. It was an unexpected coincidence, but from a different standpoint, it was a type of necessity. When I tried to explore the mysteries of the cycle of reincarnation and soul reincarnation, I would definitely obtain this knowledge. Swana hesitated, but in the end, she swallowed the white light. Then, for a short instant, the banshee's soul body was still that of a ghost. There was no difference at all. However, we all knew that she had come back to life. This, in Swana's eyes, the entire world had become different. The green grass was filled with the energy of life. The blue sky was so fresh. Even the human flesh that had always been tempting to her now looked delightful. "I'm alive." Swana's expression was filled with delight. Yet, tears from her soul were unknowingly dripping down from her soul body, transforming into nothingness in the air. The world hadn't changed. The only thing that had changed was the person watching the world. I chuckled, but didn't say anything else. The soul sacrifice that Swana needed for her resurrection. Didn't I previously have Swana personally go to the moon kingdom of the elves to do a great cleansing? The moon elf nobles were all related by blood to begin with, so they were the most suitable living sacrifices. From a certain standpoint, if it wasn't for the rows of moon elf nobles hanging from the city walls, Swana's resurrection wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Of course, considering Swana's personality, I didn't tell her any of this. I didn't want to give her unnecessary psychological pressure and additional annoyance. At this stage of resurrection, Swana was only half done. The next step would naturally be to reconstruct her physical body. Actually, this could only be accomplished with the materials available. Any random high-level undead mage would be able to accomplish this. If an undead mage didn't have the assistance of an undead mage and didn't care about the appearance of the physical body, it would also be possible to steal the physical body of a random moon elf. Of course, the compatibility rate would be slightly lower. Swana's corpse from back in the day still remained. It wouldn't be too difficult to use her bloodline as a template to create a new physical body. The compatibility rate would also be 100%. However, as I was an undead mage master, wouldn't it be a waste of an opportunity if I only had this much? Swana, are you certain that you don't want to install explosive flying fists and Mulan missiles? I'll disguise myself well. Normally, I'll just have a normal chest and right hand. But as long as I meet a powerful enemy, I'll just have to reach out with my hand and chest, and the enemy will explode. That's my ultimate killing secret weapon. There's no need. I appreciate your good intentions. How about a flamethrower at your feet? It'll allow you to fly at subsonic speeds and allow you to escape for a short period of time. There's really no need for that, Your Highness Roland. Thank you for your good intentions, TSK, you're such a picky customer. How about this, a drill? A man's romance is a drill. An adamantine drill can be used as a weapon, a mithril drill can be used to block magic, and a diamond drill can be used to dig a tunnel and escape if necessary. I'm a woman. Unfortunately, no matter how much I tried to sell her, even if I recommended my trump cards, such as 3 transformations, for split fruits, and 10,000 tentacles, Swana still wouldn't agree. In the end, I could only helplessly accept the most boring design of all and create a moon elf body that was exactly the same as Swana's. Swana completed the fusion, and judging from the time difference, it was likely that powerful individuals would be arriving soon. So, I directly detonated this entire area to create another material for them to guess. Alright, I'll leave the moon elves to you. I also said goodbye to Swana and embarked on a new journey. Roland, Why didn't you let me chat with Swana for a bit longer? Did you do something to her body? Are you afraid of being discovered? Relax. Until I press that red switch on my chest, all of her functions will remain dormant. Harlois stared at the man before her in disbelief. This guy was playing tricks right under her nose. How many did you install? All those messy designs. All of them. My techniques are pretty good, aren't they? Iron Arm Princess Swana, 3 Transformations Swana, Sky Origin Breakthrough Swana, Magical Girl Nemesis Swana. Cough, cough, I don't count the last one. Relax, you don't have to worry about my techniques. She won't use these things unless she's determined to use them. I paused for a moment. This time, it really wasn't because I hadn't created anything for a long time. Besides, her individual power level is rather weak, and she's too important. I'm really worried. If she dies again, she won't be so lucky as to become a natural undead. Reputation. What? A woman's reputation is probably even more important than her life. Who can guarantee that she won't encounter life-threatening dangers in her entire life? How will she be able to continue living if those messy things appear? A woman. Hee hee. What else did you do? I didn't do anything. I can swear on it. You didn't do anything? Harlois paused in surprise. Through our soul connection, she learned the truth. Indeed, I didn't do anything at all. All I did was keep my physical body's ability to change gender with my soul. Oh my, you have no idea just how many techniques it took to give a physical body the ability to change gender upon contact with water. Even I had to spend so much effort in order to achieve this. Don't bite me, silly cat. I didn't intend to harm her. Let me explain. This is for the sake of the entire Elven Empire. Do you really think I'd be so bored? Of course. You're inhumane when you're bored. After a series of fights, I finally explained to the silly cat that I really wasn't doing this because I was bored. See, the other superior elves are still fine, but the Moon Elf royalty is basically extinct. It just so happens that the Moon Elf nobles are famous for being suicidal. I'm really worried. I'm not doing this for the sake of the entire elven species, am I? You're worried that another group of bastards will appear who want to split from the Moon Elf family, right? The Moon Elves also have other royalty nobles, right? I think that you only trust Swana, and you intend to have Swana's descendant become the entire Moon Elf royalty. With this Moon Elf matriarch looking after the Moon Elves, the entire Mist Alliance will be stabilized. I fell silent for a moment. I wouldn't deny it. I was truly worried that Swana wouldn't marry for the rest of her life, which would cause the trustworthy royal family to be completely destroyed. Marriage alliance. Yep, marriage alliance. From a certain standpoint, the evil political marriage of this generation was indeed quite meaningful. If Swana was a male, no matter how many moon elves there were, they would probably all send their princesses to her. Swana was a female who could only marry once, while a male could marry many times. The more entangled the moon elves were, the more stable the royal authority would be. Descendants would also be born much faster. A new moon elf dynasty would be something to look forward to. And if the moon elves, who were the most troublemakers, became stable, the entire moon elf empire would become much more stable as well. My time was limited. Who would be able to handle a moon elf rebellion every few years? As for Swana's own wishes, oftentimes, political marriages would never consider the wishes of the moon elf. I didn't need to explain it to her. At that time, not only would many moon elves voluntarily become the bad guys, even Swana, who was the leader of the moon elves, would have the resolve to sacrifice herself. I was having a headache about the moon elves before. This coincidence has finally given me some attention. Harlois fell silent for a moment. Finally, she looked at me and spoke in a serious tone. You're such a bastard. You're going to go to hell. Ha, even devils are dancing in the mortal plane. Aren't we in hell right now? Scheming against the pure and innocent Swana made both of us feel terrible. However, Harlois finally broke this silence. In that case, with your skills, it shouldn't be difficult for you to physically deal with Renee and that fatty, right? You're not hoping that Renee will do the same, are you? That fatty was innocently shot. What? I don't understand. I did my best to look at the sky and heard nothing. As for whether or not I had the skills, back in Sulphur Mountain City, I told you that it was just a minor surgery. How difficult could it be? Roland, you bastard. TSK, silly cat, do you want to know how cats die? They die for talking too much. Chapter 702. From a certain standpoint, I really didn't want to care about such a mess. But thinking about it from a different angle, it didn't really matter whether I cared or not. In terms of exploring life and souls, magical civilization wasn't necessarily behind modern technology. At the very least, due to the development of undead magic, things like organ transplants, human head transplants, and body parts that modern civilization viewed as difficult or taboo were no longer difficult. Stitched monsters were made from the body parts of dead bodies. Making the dead speak would seem like a miracle in modern technology, but in magical civilization, even a novice undead acolyte would be able to do it. Moral theories that should have been restraints were meaningless in front of the power of a war-torn world. The result of having no taboos was that you would go too far. Chimeras were made from the body parts of living humans and the organs of wild beasts. Flesh and blood puppets were one of the most common magic puppets. In the eyes of mags, it was never difficult to reconstruct these life forms, not to mention just changing a single organ. Alright, the reason why I digressed so much is because I want to point out a fact that everyone has overlooked. I'm not the only necromancer. Transforming, changing limbs, and so on, if you really want to do it, in this world, it's actually not difficult at all. As for the difference between surgical transformations and magical transformations, as long as the technique was perfect and there were no side effects, it would be the same as being born beautiful and having plastic surgery. At any rate, it was just a psychological difference, and I wouldn't be able to tell the difference myself. If I had to say, my system was being too polite. If it was me, I would have just given that man a birth control operation like how I would treat a pet that kept barking all night. Cough, cough, I digressed. At any rate, I had already left the Northlands. As for Swana and Renee, they would naturally be in charge of their own futures. There were plenty of undead mags in the Northlands, and I wouldn't be needed. And I had plenty of things to worry about. Cavendish. It would be quite easy for my soul connection to leak information, but I didn't hide my worries. Yes, that's what I'm most worried about right now. Besides, he's searching for the deepest part of the chaos abyss, where Cynthia's physical body is. That's too unsettling. The situation in the mortal plane was rather chaotic, but overall, it was still acceptable. Not only that, with the Hell faction and the Order faction's hard work, the situation was developing far better than it had been in the game's history. If they still couldn't overcome this crisis, then there was nothing more I could say. No, more accurately speaking, there was nothing I could do. But there's one thing that I've been worried about from beginning to end. Yes, it was Cavendish. Just what did he want to do? Just what did he do? What did he want? Currently, he was at the peak of all living creatures. If he wanted power, beauties, and wealth, he only needed to reach out his hand. If he wanted to enjoy war and slaughter, he could directly enter the mortal plane. In fact, if he suddenly turned over a new leaf and hoped to see world peace, with his strength and influence, his chances of success wouldn't be low. Even if he wanted to conquer the world, I could understand. That brat was used to having a brain cramp. There was nothing he couldn't do. And now, no matter if it was my spies in the Chaos Abyss or the information I exchanged with the gods, I couldn't find any trace of Carwen's. A powerful main god had disappeared from the entire multiverse together with several of his most trusted aides. And it had already been nearly 4 months since they disappeared. The most terrifying thing was the unknown. This is the feeling of not being able to find anyone when the map is completely lit up. It's like when you have 200 units of mantises and are ready to go out to crush the enemy, but you always feel like the enemy has prepared 2 battalions of aircraft carriers the moment you step out. Those who don't play RTS probably won't understand this, but it does feel good. It wasn't scary to have a powerful enemy. What was scary was not knowing what they wanted to do or what they had already done. To be honest, with how much information was kept secret, I estimated that not a single one of Cavendish's subordinates knew what their master intended to do. Currently, The only two things he had done were search for the deepest part of the chaos abyss and make the holy war proceed as planned. It would be quite difficult to guess his true goal from these two. It wasn't that I didn't have any guesses, it was that there were far too many guesses, and it was impossible to determine which one was true. Stop scaring yourself. If even half of your guesses were true, this world would have been destroyed long ago. Since we're still alive and well, that means that he isn't that crazy. I nodded and didn't say anything else. However, the anxiety in my heart refused to fade. While the forbidden spell was weak, I had sent out countless spies to exchange information with the gods I was close to. However, I had never been able to obtain any useful information. Now that I had some free time, and I had also gathered all the myth-ranked materials, I only needed some time to level up. I had regained my freedom, but I was no longer able to patiently wait for news. Since I couldn't obtain any information, I had to find it myself. By the way, where should we start searching? Harloy's words were quite simple, but also quite practical. This would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. I really didn't know where to start. My spies in the Chaos Abyss were unable to find Harloy's, and the Fairies' omnipresent information network was also unable to find Harloy's. It would be completely meaningless to search anywhere. Let's go find your father first. Perhaps he'll have some information. Or should we go to the south to find that mirror? I could only take things one step at a time. First, I would break through to semigod rank. I had enemies all over the world, and it would be hilarious if I didn't die for no reason. Right, could he be in the mortal plane? Look at the Chaos Abyss. It's impossible to find him. It's possible that it's dark under the lamp. That's possible, but it's unlikely. You know about the star net, right? The two gods of the river Styx and the Chaos Abyss are currently monitoring the entire star net. They'll only know if someone enters the mortal plane. Yet, they said that they didn't see any reactions similar to what Cavendish did. I shook my head. It was highly unlikely that Harloy's was in the mortal plane. The water here wasn't deep enough yet. If a giant whale like Harloy's entered the water, the entire water level would increase. It would be nearly impossible for him to hide. System. Do you have any suggestions? I don't. Perhaps you can ask a divine fraud. I paused in surprise for a moment, but then became delighted. This was indeed a good idea. I was naturally immune to all detection abilities. Cavendish might not have such an ability. No, as a main god, Harloy's is also capable of hiding his own existence. What you need to ask is something like, where will I be even more unlucky? Or where will Cavendish be even more unlucky if I go? You don't have to be the target. Perhaps you'll be able to find some clues. Unlucky. I would be even more unlucky if I met Cavendish. Cavendish would be unlucky if he met me. From a certain standpoint, this was indeed true. Karma would also be the least costly. However, the creator of the natural laws was teaching me how to cheat, which made me feel rather awkward. Why do I feel like you're taking pleasure in my misfortune? I'm just imagining things. I shook my head and ignored her. Prophecy. I actually knew quite a few divine frauds. But, if you wanted to know which divine frauds were the best and most abundant, going south to the mage country would be the best choice. Chapter 703. For adventurers who were traveling alone, this was quite a good time. The arrival of the elemental tide had brought about the dawn of a new era. Every day was an opportunity, and every day brought new changes. Alright then, let me be honest. As long as you had a strong enough fist or a good enough brain, there would be plenty of opportunities to earn money and gain fame. Money and fame didn't just represent wealth, they could also buy power and status. A poor family could become a rich family with a single thought. There were some things that I wouldn't even dare to think about 10 years ago that weren't for sale. But now, they were clearly priced goods. Recruitment, wanted, recruitment, bounties. Why is it so chaotic these days? Before me was a public notice board filled with all sorts of bounty missions and announcements. But compared to before, the various recruitment advertisements were far more eye-catching. I had originally thought that it would be quite troublesome for a stranger to be in a new city since it was a time of war. After all, spies would be quite deadly. I had expected that the inspections would be quite strict, but I never expected that everything would be so smooth. Not only did the inspections for merchants become much stricter, and all sorts of taxes increased exponentially, the checkpoints were also much more convenient for armed adventurers and night. In fact, the checkpoints were even more friendly to refugees who had previously been viewed as a disaster. The reason? I had previously been rather curious about this, but I instantly understood after seeing these recruitment advertisements with excellent conditions. From a certain standpoint, population was an important resource, especially in such a chaotic world. Who would stop precious resources from flowing into their own territory? Although it was a recruitment notice, not all kingdoms were recruiting soldiers. Merchants and travelers were looking for long-term bodyguards, mercenary groups were looking for mercenaries, kingdoms were looking for soldiers, domain lords were looking for soldiers, and even mayors and village chiefs were looking for militia. The world was no longer safe, but the people's hearts were in chaos first. Not only were the nobles and wealthy merchants spending money to buy peace of mind, domain lords were spending all their savings in their castles to recruit soldiers. Kingdoms and empires were creating various knight squadrons and mercenary groups. The autonomous territories and slightly more remote villages were all creating militias and self-defense squads. In the taverns and at the stop sign, images of the frontlines were repeatedly broadcasted with the help of memory crystals. The frontlines were having a hard time, and the other human kingdoms were feeling helpless and hopeless before the demon wave. This caused the frontlines to enter a frenzied state of combat preparation. Meanwhile, new battlefields were being opened up, and the new armies were being sent into endless battlefields. And as the Holy War progressed, the entire human race's combat potential would be unearthed. This was only the beginning. Along the way, I asked around for information. There was news from various battlefronts, but nothing that piqued my interest. Aren't you going to participate? If you enter the battlefield like this, you can instantly change the outcome. As she flipped through the report she got from the little fairy, Harlois expressed her opinion with interest. It's meaningless. There are too many. That's right, there were far too many of them. As the elemental tide became more active, those harmless wild beasts began to transform into magical beasts. Sealed magical beasts and evil gods broke through their seals one by one, while foreign invaders arrived one after the other. The kingdom's knight squadron had to deal with foreign invaders, and the domain lords had to deal with the increasingly savage magical beasts. Even the militia and self-defense troops had to fight against magical beasts, evil cultists, and bandits. This was a test that the Holy War had given to the humans, who were the rulers of the earth. The victory of an individual or an entire region was meaningless. But due to the existence of justice points and the contract heroes system, as well as the excellent overall situation, the overall situation was far better than in the game's history. I passed through countless battlefields along the way. It wasn't that I was cold-blooded and didn't want to take care of them. It was that there was simply no way I could take care of them all. And from a different standpoint, these battlefields were also opportunities for ordinary people to improve themselves. With Justice Point's assistance, it was worth looking forward to their growth speed. Sigh, if only my dragon scale armor could be repaired, I wouldn't have to wear such heavy armor anymore. Currently, I was wearing a heavy set of golden half-body armor and an enchanted golden longsword. I was disguised as an ordinary high-level knight. I was a 17 or 18-year-old youth with top-level equipment and excellent martial arts skills. My family's emblem and armor had been intentionally worn down. This was far too common in this great generation where only adventuring would bring rewards. If there was anything special about me, it would be that I wasn't riding a large horse. Instead, I was riding a new steed created by the magical civilization, a metal motorcycle. This was extraordinarily expensive. It wasn't that I didn't want to keep a low profile. This motorcycle helped me attract a dozen bandits along the way. It was that I would sometimes abandon my steed and fly by myself. A living horse wouldn't be able to survive for long if it was thrown into a land of death. However, this motorcycle's advantage was that as long as I had enough mana, I wouldn't have to worry about the horse dying from exhaustion. What I was most happy about was that after using up all my justice points, I was finally able to match my true age with my physical appearance. I no longer had to wear that bracelet that would lie about my age. What was even more annoying was that although my physical body's age had increased, my dragon scale armor still showed no signs of returning to its original size. It would seem that my method of forcefully recovering my age with the age fruit had failed. There was no helping it. In order to increase my defensive power, I had to apply a layer of brass coating on my heavy adamantite armor, making it look like I was wearing ordinary bronze armor. Others put on adamantite armor in order to show off their natural divine power and wealth. You, on the other hand, put on an extremely shabby brass coating. You're so pathetic, there's no helping it. Swords and swords don't have eyes. Safety comes first. And if I'm wearing heavy adamantite armor, humans probably won't even be able to wear it. I didn't have my dragon scale armor, which was impenetrable and convenient. As a knight who mainly relied on melee combat, I could only use ordinary defensive armor. Since I was using adamantite armor to increase my defensive power, I naturally wore the sturdiest and most expensive adamantite heavy armor. The adamantite's high density made it incredibly sturdy. At the very least, when I passed through several small battlefields, not to mention stray arrows and muskets, even ballistae and heavy cannons weren't able to penetrate my adamantite armor. The only downside was that the heavy adamantite armor was far stronger than an ordinary human's physical strength. Even my Daybreak War commemorative adamantite number 59, Iron Horse, was somewhat unable to handle the weight of this adamantite armor. Wherever I passed, there were obvious tracks left behind. In some places, the roads were so bad that the adamantite armor would crush the road, causing the Iron Horse to sink into the mud. Is it overloaded? The road's been crushed. Be careful that the domain lords come after you for compensation. At the very least, take off your armor when you're in the city. It's like you're suffering from paranoia. At the very least, I'll think about it after this period of time. In this place, paranoia really isn't a fake thing. We were currently in the Stanley Orthodox country. On the world map, this was nothing more than a small country that would be difficult to find if you didn't look carefully. However, this country was the core of the northern divine battlefront. Not only were the Holy Church's high-level cardinals stationed here, there were also numerous knight squadrons and angel squadrons stationed here. Ever since I entered the Stanley Orthodox country, I had already run into more than 10 temporary checkpoints. And, as long as it was someone from the Northlands, the checkpoints would be much more serious and complicated. Of course, I had a dozen identification names with me, and I could even smear Harloise's fragments on my face to disguise myself. These simple checkpoints were meaningless. I had chosen to pass through the northern divine battlefront here because I wanted to take a look at the situation here and evaluate the God of Holy Light's ambitions for the Northlands. However, the situation here wasn't good. Most of the residents here were devout believers of the Holy Church, especially the high-level Holy Knight and low-level angels who constantly patrolled the Northlands. It was obvious that the Holy Church was paying a lot of attention to this place since there was no fighting going on here. Due to my Northland accent and my Northland Iron Horse, I had far more checkpoints than other travelers. However, I also learned who the Holy Church's leaders were. Archbishop Gaboro and Cardinal Soentu. The Holy Church had simultaneously sent out an archbishop and a cardinal. Not to mention, this was a Stanley Orthodox country to begin with, and a regional cardinal was responsible for guarding this place. For 3 high-level cardinals to refuse to stay in a small country like this meant that the Holy Church viewed this place with great importance. However, I was quite familiar with these 2 names. The Eagle of Holy War and the Golden Shame? What an ironic combination. Due to how important the Holy Church was in human society, the cardinals in the game's history were all very important. They would either go down in infamy for thousands of years, or be remembered for hundreds of generations. However, these 2 cardinals were at opposite ends of the spectrum. Gaboro still hadn't worn a red robe yet, but he was one of the few high-level Holy Church leaders who had great strategic foresight during the San Antonio battlefield in the game's history. During the middle phase of the Holy War, Gaboro had an angel squadron, a Holy Knight squadron, and a mage squadron under his command. These 3 squadrons became a mobile fighting force that could be used for emergency situations. Meanwhile, Gaboro's colleague, Cardinal Soentu, Had the legendary title of as long as you paid enough, you could even make a deal with the devil. As long as Soentu was there, he didn't care about the battle at all, but he would definitely earn as much money as he could. Buying and selling military achievements was the norm here. He was the only person in history to directly trade with the enemy and sell out his subordinates. I was now feeling rather conflicted. Originally, I had wanted to test out Gaboro's abilities, but I felt that it would be a pity if I killed Gaboro. Also, keeping him alive would be a threat to the Northlands, and killing Soentu would make me feel like I was helping the enemy. Let's keep Soentu alive. With him here, even if the Northlands' front lines are successfully sealed off, we can still use money to buy a way out from him. Locusts were quite annoying, but it might be a good thing if they were on the enemy's side. The Holy War was still in its early stages. The Cardinals hadn't experienced any trials yet, and Soentu's true nature hadn't been exposed yet. As an expert in internal affairs, Soentu was probably the true leader of the Holy Church. As long as nothing major happened, Soentu would likely remain here forever. In that case, I should even think of a way to help him obtain some political achievements so that he could stabilize his position. As for Gaboro, I should keep him alive for now. No, he's one of the few awakened in the Holy Church. Perhaps I can have a chat with him. Chapter 704. As one of the higher-ups of the cult nation, Habalo was very low-key and rarely appeared in public. He was in charge of military affairs and the setting up of the defensive line. He should be in charge of the daily patrols and patrols of the night regiment. He was a busy man. Just sneak in and wait for him in his room. Isn't that how secret talks are done? Harlois made it sound so simple, but I didn't have the ability to sneak around as mysteriously as the silly cat. It was better not to do something as foolish as sneaking around while carrying several hundred kilograms of heavy armor. The moment I was discovered, the Angel Squadron and high-level Holy Knight would surround and kill me. Even I would have a headache. I thought about it. I might be mistaken for an assassin if I were to sneak into a meeting. But then, I suddenly understood. Do you think I'm stupid? I could have just sent an invitation card. That's right, I had unknowingly fallen into the wrong path of thinking. Although the Holy Church and I were constantly fighting in secret, on the surface, the Northlands factions were still allies with the Holy Church. Directly surround and kill me? Declaring war on the Mist Alliance before the northern battlefront was even completed? Just thinking about it was stupid enough. Kill me in private? I felt that it would be very difficult. Perhaps it would be difficult to win, but it would be super easy to let the entire city know that Roland was here. Moreover, if I'm not wrong, there might be other gains if I pay him a formal visit. Thus, I immediately wrote a letter and engraved my family crest and magic seal on it. Then, I found someone to deliver it to the local church headquarters. Less than half an hour later, the door to my hotel room swung open, and Gaboro walked in with an ashen face. He looked like he was in his 40s, but since he was able to reach his current position in the Holy Church, his real age should be over 60 years old. He had taken good care of himself and dressed up well. His white robe was not flashing with the radiance of divine spells, but rather the radiance of arcane spells. The mana fluctuations were not weak. It should be a priest's robe that was modified from an archmage's robe. It seemed that he was a pragmatist. He had a squarish face and a rather well-built body. His attainments in holy light were probably quite high, and it seemed that he had been quite handsome when he was younger. However, his current expression was rather unsightly. Your Highness Roland, do you have a grudge against me? I don't think I've offended you in the past. I chuckled. It seemed that Bishop Habalo wasn't an idiot after all. There's no enmity between us. I admire you the most out of all the idiots at the bishop level. I just wanted to have a chat with you. What did I do? I simply wrote, I'm at room 302 of the Pig's Tail Hotel. Tell Bishop Gaboro to come see me. I have some important matters to discuss with him. I won't talk to anyone else if they come with me. I guarantee that tonight, the Pope of the Holy Church will receive an urgent report. The enemy of the Holy Light, Roland, has suddenly appeared in the Holy Church and is requesting a secret meeting with Bishop Gaboro. I reckon that no matter what we discuss, and no matter what Bishop tells us, the Pope won't believe us. Isn't this a setup? Of course I was trying to frame him. This was obviously a scam. It would be strange if I didn't frame him. However, with my status, it wouldn't be convincing at all for me to frame an archbishop who hadn't even made his name yet. Considering how much of a scoundrel the other person in charge was, it was unlikely that he would let go of such a good opportunity to attack his political rival. There would probably be all kinds of small reports. Yet, despite knowing that this was a trap, Gaboro still had to come. Otherwise, not only would he be derelict in his duty, but he would also have a guilty conscience. Bishop's expression was already quite unsightly. Since we still had some serious business to discuss, I decided not to laugh. Hey, kid, what do you think of the current situation? Very bad. No matter what aspect you're asking about, it's still very bad. It was always nice to talk to smart people. If I was talking to a diehard member of the Holy Church about this topic, I wouldn't even bother to say something stupid like the God of Holy Light is undefeatable. Yep, the current situation was quite terrible. Not only for the Northlands, but also for the Holy Church, this so-called Northern Battlefront, and Bishop himself. I shouldn't have come to the Northlands. But you had no choice but to come. Bishop's tone was quite harsh and even sounded like he had given up on himself. However, he didn't hide his dissatisfaction with the Holy Church's Northern Battlefront policy at all. Can you tell me which genius came up with such a genius strategy as the Northern Battlefront? What do you intend to do? Alright then, I didn't even need to use honorifics. However, my tone was filled with anticipation. Of course I'm going to properly thank him. I emphasized the word thank as if I was referring to something else. It's that idiot Thornto. He personally came here and even dragged me here. Bishop's expression was filled with delight. It was as if he was hoping that I would do something to Thornto. Yep, after you're done here, remember to tell him how grateful I am to Cardinal Thornto. Bishop's expression instantly collapsed. It wouldn't be a big deal if I told him that, but if he told me that, that would mean that he had a falling out with Thornto. Right, if it's possible, please help me tell him that after the Northern Battlefront is completed, I'll be doing business with him. You can go tell him yourself. Bishop's face was completely red. Even his neck was red from anger. He knew very well what Thornto's personality was like. This was quite possible. However, even if he told others about this, nobody would believe him. He wouldn't even know who to report to. If this was a ploy to sow discord, then it wouldn't be good for me to do anything I wanted. No matter how much I thought about it, I could only keep it to myself. Looking at the other party's sullen expression, I found it even more hilarious. Perhaps this was the so-called loyal minister in troubled times. While his colleagues were still living in a dream, pretending to be asleep was far more comfortable than being the only one awake. She was quite devout in her faith, and she was also quite loyal to the church. I had no intention of trying to poach her away from me, because I didn't like to bang my head against a wall or waste my breath. But if she used this incident as an opportunity and was forced to change sides due to internal strife, then don't blame me. I regret coming to see you. The more he thought about it, the more vexed he became. He was probably so angry that he was about to cry. It's too late. I smiled as I took out a stack of books and documents. I really did have some serious business to discuss with the higher-ups of the Holy Church. Quotations from Estrada? What? Did teacher say these things? Ayo, I really didn't expect that this person is actually my junior brother. Then I'll have a greater sense of accomplishment when I scam him. Actually, we can have a good chat about pure holy light belief and the pillar of holy light of the Hades. When I walked out of the hotel whistling, Gaboro, who had left in a hurry, had an ugly expression on his face as usual. This was just an idle game. I didn't necessarily need to gain anything from it. At any rate, it would be a good thing if the two higher-ups of the Holy Church were having internal strife. If Pope Coloma lacked trust in Gaboro, it would be even better if he was sent away. And now, it was time for me to run away. Otherwise, the Holy Church's hidden factions would gather their strongest experts. The Holy Church had quite a solid foundation. Even Estrada would have a headache trying to deal with all the old undying higher-ups. Perhaps Gaboro had even been sent here in order to keep me in check. There were also the bounty hunters who would be everywhere. Even if they weren't too difficult to deal with, I didn't want to get involved. It seemed that the bounty on my head was more than enough to build an entire city. TSK, it's still safe in the city, but I'll be unlucky if I go out. And so, the moment I left the city, I unhesitatingly summoned the floating mage tower Yongye City. Chapter 705. While Roland was busy searching without any clues, his brother, Cavendish, wasn't in a good mood either. Right now, he was standing on a special area without the power of the abyss. This was a certain secret realm on the 33rd level of the abyss, but it was actually the deepest part of the abyss. Above his head was an endless flight of stairs, but Cavendish was sulking as he stared at the pitch-black void gate. Everything went smoothly in the beginning. He obtained the information about entering the abyss from Cynthia's soul fragment. But then, he was blocked by this void gate. This gate was formed by Cynthia's divine power. It was also her final line of defense. Only she could pass through it. At first, Cavendish thought that obtaining Cynthia's soul would be enough to break through this line of defense. But it turned out that he had underestimated the madness of this ultimate of chaos. Nobody expected that the soul fragment that lingered in Cavendish's mind was only an incomplete part. The real Cynthia had already begun her usual evolutionary plan more than 100 years ago. The child of chaos. Cutting herself into hundreds of pieces and then letting the strong prey on the weak. That woman is simply insane. Anyone who knew about Cynthia's situation would probably think that this god of creation had already gone insane. More than 200 years ago, as the end of chaos, she split her soul into hundreds of pieces and scattered them into the river Styx. More than 100 ladies of chaos were born in these 200 years continuously. These souls could be said to be individual individuals. They had their own memories and personalities. In fact, some of them had even reincarnated multiple times due to accidents. Their uniqueness was not only their astonishing talents, but also their natural hostility. When two ladies of chaos met, killing and devouring were unavoidable. The winner would obtain everything that the loser had. In every holy war, due to the pull of karma, all the ladies of chaos would meet in the end. Some of them were human princesses, some were troll huntresses, and some were even social beauties of nobles. But no matter who they were, the outcome of killing each other was unavoidable. The final winner would return to the will of Abyss and become the new Cynthia. The original Cynthia? She had probably lost her sense of self a long time ago. The current Cynthia was more like a system than a person. She herself was the pinnacle of chaos, the amalgamation of many consciousnesses. As for whether she would be the one laughing in the end, from the very beginning, Cynthia probably didn't care. And in the endless slaughter and devouring, Cynthia obtained countless memories and knowledge, as well as all sorts of experiences of growing up from weak to strong. She was the incarnation of chaos, a composite of endless personalities. And this wouldn't be the first time. In fact, every holy war would be a period of internal conflict for her. The sparks and new knowledge she gained in the holy war would become her nourishment. While her physical body was in a deep slumber, Cynthia, who had control over the cycle of reincarnation, had this cheat method to constantly grow and strengthen herself. The so-called will of the Chaos Abyss was only one of the most unique souls out of several hundred. She carried out her duties as the ruler of the Chaos Abyss, but she had no idea that she was only a part of the chaos system. The true task of the will of the Chaos Abyss was to scatter these soul shards into the river Styx 200 years before the Holy War began so that they could transform into a new generation of Chaos Girls. Only the final Chaos Girls would have the ability to break through this final defense and return to Cynthia's physical body to become a new collective. All power originated from the soul. This was the foundational natural law of the world of Aishi. Since Cynthia's physical body was unable to evolve, she chose to use this type of chaos to evolve her own soul. And once her physical body truly recovered, her even more powerful soul would make her truly undefeatable. Every holy war would be a harvest feast for Cynthia. Not only would the souls of all who entered the river Styx nourish her physical body, the countless new knowledge and inheritances from her most brilliant generation would also make this creator goddess even more powerful. How many more Chaos Girls are there? 57. We're controlling a total of 13. 57 crystal lamps were faintly glowing on the walls of the void. Next to them, there were more than 200 extinguished crystal lamps. This indirectly proved that when Cynthia was at her craziest, she had created more than 300 Chaos Girls at the same time. And not all of them were female. Over the past 8 years, Cavendish had used the chips in his hands to actively kill the Chaos Girls who had yet to awaken. At least 50 Chaos Girls had directly or indirectly died by his hand. His current goal was probably to kill the other Chaos Girls and then transform the one he controlled into Cynthia. Then he would enter the Void Wall and find the physical body of the Chaos Abyss Goddess. Soon, more Chaos Girls will awaken. I want Donates and Deceiver to speed up the process and ignite the entire world with the flames of war. We want all the Chaos Girls to return here. Chapter 706. In a way, I was in a good mood, especially since I had gotten rid of all the troublesome matters. I knew that soon, the news that Roland had left the Northlands would spread, and people would come looking for me. But whether or not they would be able to find me would depend on my mood. Heloise's face-changing mask is easy to use, cheap, and can even help you grow taller. Recently, I discovered that Heloise's abilities were becoming more and more useful. Cough, the silly cat was baring her teeth again, so I had to be careful. Since I was here to gather information, I would go sightseeing at several places every once in a while. The local thieves' guilds, adventurers' guilds, and merchant guilds would all be well informed. Those who weren't well informed had all died. They would also have first-hand information, which would be quite useful. Those who didn't understand information gathering would often think that information gathering was about gathering information from all directions. As long as one had enough money and enough intelligence agents, one would be able to know everything. But actually, this was an extremely amateurish way of thinking. Snakes had their own paths, and rats had their own paths. Every profession required different information. The intelligence agents of the Thieves' Guild were all beggars and thieves. They lived at the bottom of society and collected a lot of information, ranging from the increase in the price of food to a certain noble lord marrying the 11th. However, due to the large amount of information, after being sorted out, there was only information related to power, money, and power struggles. Moreover, the source of the information was limited to the city, and it was limited to only one city. If one wanted to find a certain person in a certain city and investigate their background, it would be best to contact the Thieves' Guilds. This was a long-term and stable source of income for the Thieves' Guilds. But if one wanted to search for treasures, one would have to be careful that the Thieves' Guilds would take advantage of the Thieves' Guilds. It would be impossible to give these greedy thieves any information that involved important benefits. Meanwhile, the Adventurers' Guilds were the exact opposite. Apart from a small number of professional spies, most of their information came from adventurers who actively or passively submitted information. Although most of the information was unreliable, the Adventurers' Guilds had a wide range of locations. In some areas where few people visited, the Adventurers' Guilds were the only source of information. Information about magical beasts, ruins in the wilderness, sightings in remote areas, and so on could all be found by the adventurers. However, the Adventurers' Guild's information had the same problem as the Thieves' Guild's. There was too much information, and it was difficult to tell the truth from the lies. Since the Adventurers' Guild's intelligence agents weren't professional enough, their situation was far worse than the Thieves' Guild's. However, the Adventurers' Guilds had a good reputation, and could often hire skilled helpers. Half of the Merchant Guild's information came from buying information. The Thieves' Guild and the Adventurers' Association were their sources of information. The other half came from collecting and organizing information from a massive amount of sources. Most of their information sources were related to money. The information of the information sources were related to money. The information about the information sources, such as the information of the information about of information sources. This sounded unreliable, but due to the power of gold coins, the adventurers' information sources were incredibly wide. They even had professional analysts. In fact, the major merchant guilds were even capable of actively interfering with the development of industries and influencing the progress of the war. They had the most complete information analysis. Actually, Information sources were the most valuable. For a product, from the weather, manpower, industrial information, and public security required for its production, to the safety of the region and war zones involved in its transportation, to the greed of the local nobles and the level of taxation, to the average wages, living standards, and the trend of purchasing desire of the buyers, a true great merchant would definitely be a top-notch information collector and organizer. As for the nobles and royalties' information sources, they weren't reliable at all. Their information sources were directly related to personal abilities and family history. The strong ones were ridiculously strong, while the weak ones would only be discovered when there was a rebellion. The nobles' information sources were usually related to war, politics, and the nobles' families. They lacked basic sources, so they were actually the most unreliable. I couldn't be bothered to look for them, so I directly asked the Northland's Mist Alliance to use diplomatic channels to exchange information. If there was any information related to Cavendish, they could just directly send it to me. It just so happened that the nobles' information sources were all on top of their heads. Even though the information wasn't anything special, they treated it like a treasure. It was incredibly difficult to communicate with them, which made it even more difficult for me to do anything. Unlike ordinary adventurers, in my eyes, the most important information source would be the merchant guilds, followed by the thieves' guilds and adventurers' associations. The most important source would be the omnipotent royal spies from the legends. But along the way, I obtained, a legend-ranked golden-armored knight is riding an iron horse with a black cat as he gallops through the wilderness. His great sword is thirsting for demon blood. Haha, Roland, how does it feel to become a legend-ranked demon hunter? A great sword knight? What was going on here? Why did I become the important information source when I was the one looking for information? Looking for Cavendish directly would definitely be impossible. Even if I put my face on the wanted list, I would only be able to find Roland in the end. However, Cavendish was the Abyss Prince. His subordinates were either demons or evil cultists. And these evil cultists weren't devils that were skilled at hiding themselves. Impatient demons and crazy evil cultists would definitely cause some trouble in the mortal plane. No matter what Cavendish wanted to do right now, he definitely wouldn't be able to avoid the mortal plane. And since I knew that he would send either demons or evil cultists, then all I needed to do was focus on the evil cultists and demons. Alright, I knew that this wasn't reliable, but there was no harm in trying as much as possible before I reached the mage country. Perhaps I would obtain additional information. Yep, the hero saved the damsel in distress 7 times, destroyed the evil cult's altar 3 times, and killed off a dozen demon warlocks. Oh, mighty demon hunter knight, you are undefeatable. Why is your sword so yellow? Is it because it has been stained with the demon's sulfur blood? I just think that those idiotic traveling poets need to improve on their basic qualities. Demon's blood isn't yellow. Also, there's no hero saving the damsel in distress. There's only the hero saving the damsel in distress 4 times, the grandmother once, and the naughty child twice. TSK, even the demon's sacrifices these days don't have anything new to offer. Since I had obtained information on demons and evil cultists, I naturally had to investigate them. When I stumbled upon an evil cult's altar or a demon warlock's evil sacrifice, I wanted to say something like I'm sorry, I found the wrong person, but nobody would believe me. Not only that, demon warlocks had recently become much more powerful, but their sense of beauty had also greatly decreased. At the very least, the demon warlocks we killed back in the day were all young women as sacrifices. Think about your luck. Do you think it's even your turn to save a beautiful woman? You should be satisfied that an auntie saved you. Silly cat, shut up. The final result was that I went on a killing spree. Not only did I obtain many justice points, I even obtained the hilarious title of Selfless Golden-Armored Demon Hunter Knight. Wasn't that Garin? Next time I jumped out of the bushes, I should shout Demacia to fit the occasion. Not only that, since I was a free demon hunter, I would immediately leave after killing a demon. Not only that, the demon hunters were all difficult opponents that ordinary adventurers wouldn't be able to deal with. Not only that, I was able to insta-kill all the demon hunters. This hilarious title of mine became famous quite quickly. Bards who had nothing better to do were already starting to scam others for money. Of course, there were also benefits to this. Previously, I had to spend money to buy information, and I had to be interrogated here and there. In the end, I would often have to resort to violence. But now, information would be delivered to me whenever I arrived at a certain location. I was afraid that there would still be demon hunters remaining after my free helper left. Another problem was that I would have to distinguish which information was a malicious attempt to eliminate my competitors. Forget it, you're the Mist Alliance's top spy. It's already good enough that no one came looking for you. That's right, I had collected information on geography, warfare, business, nobles, and so on. All of them were the rarest first-hand information. It was likely that by the time I had some free time, I would be able to directly create a new map of the Donglan Principality. Not only that, all of this information was the most up-to-date information on the Holy War, as well as the geographical information on all the places that the Mist Alliance had passed on their way south. As for me, I didn't have any intentions of leading an army south, at least not right now. And now, I arrived at a place called Abundant Valley City. An unexpected piece of information from the Thieves' Guild caught my attention. A former holy maiden accidentally fell from grace and became pregnant with a demon fetus. She even corrupted into a witch. What sort of plot is this? Chapter 707. In the fantasy world, the term saintess could not be used casually. In the era of theocracy, purity and holiness were exclusive to the gods. Therefore, only the beloved daughter of God deserved the title of saintess, and only the woman chosen by the Church of True God would have this name. Whether they were holy or not was not important at all. What was important was that they were the face of the church, which meant that they were important publicity materials. Most of them were young and beautiful. They were orphans raised by the church and were part-time priests of the true God. It wasn't that they didn't have noble statuses, but that their statuses were too prominent and not suitable to be manipulated. This was actually not a very good job. It was one thing to run around to spread the doctrine, but sometimes it was necessary to go to the battlefield to boost morale. The saintess was not a rare thing, and there was no need for her to be absolutely safe. Maybe her death could boost morale. As the beloved daughter of God, how could she fall in love with a mortal? As a holy maiden, let alone fall in love, she couldn't even get close to a man. People couldn't always be young and beautiful, but the saintess had to be young and beautiful. Well, this was a profession that relied on youth. Once a person neared his 30s, it would be time for him to step down from his position. At that time, he would decline in all aspects, and his marriage would also be limited. Therefore, those female priests with real prospects would not hesitate to give up even if they had the chance to become a saintess. Only those female priests who were born as commoners and orphans would embark on this seemingly glorious path of no return. Perhaps the different churches treated the saintesses differently, but in my memory, most of the saintesses were like this at such a young age. Although they seemed to be glorious, they were already destined to become pitiful existences that were left behind for the rest of their lives. This time, the victim was the holy maiden of the Church of Thunder and Sword, Leona. She was 30 years old, and considering that people could get married at the age of 14 in this world, she was truly an old leftover woman. I've never heard of a church and a saintess. The god of the Church of Lightning and Sword was named Sylvan. He was a new generation of gods who had just ascended to godhood in the past few decades. His priesthood included lightning and sword, but they were two completely different concepts. I kind of sympathize with his pope. How are they going to fabricate this doctrine? Something like a holy sword that brings the lightning of judgment. Something like a thunderbolt. It feels more and more like a lousy night novel. It wasn't easy to obtain a divine domain for a god. If two gods had similar divinity, such as one who claimed to be the holder of knowledge, and the other who claimed to be the owner of books, the two gods were destined to fight to the death. Similar priesthoods of the same nature were equivalent to two people occupying the same throne, and two people spending the same salary. In the end, they would definitely fight to the death. It seemed that this example was a little unreliable. Two tigers couldn't live on the same mountain, unless it was a male and a female. Well, this time, it was more or less correct. Not every god was able to create their own divine concept like Wu Mian's he. To most demigods, being able to ascend to godhood was enough. Being able to pick up a divine domain was already a blessing, so it would be too much to be picky. Then, when it came to compiling the doctrine, it would be a headache. Our Lord wields the holy thunderbolt sword of judgment. Swordsmen who believe in our Lord will move like thunder and wield their swords like lightning. They will also obtain sword skills that are like thunder. I did my best to stifle my laughter when I saw that this was basically the exact same doctrine that we casually came up with. However, the silly cat unhesitatingly laughed and rolled around on the ground. I bought a full set of information from the Thief Guild. What was rather surprising was that Leona was actually still a holy maiden at the time of the incident. A 30-year-old holy maiden is, in this day and age, there's even a 10,000-year-old, a 30-year-old magical girl cat. Let me remind you, she's currently sharpening her claws. However, the following information made me understand that this saintess wasn't just a flower vase. Sylvan had only ascended to the mortal plane several decades ago. His descendants were still in the mortal plane. In terms of seniority, Leona could be counted as his granddaughter. Just this alone was enough to make her different from other flower vase holy maidens. She had always enjoyed divine favor. The Church of Thunder and Sword didn't have a very long history. However, Leona had always been a core member of the church. She was an excellent swordswoman and priest. She had saved the church several times when it was on the brink of destruction. She had even experienced God's descent before. She was incredibly famous in the church. In fact, some people even faintly saw her as the next pope. Ordinary women's beauty would begin to deteriorate at the age of 30. However, powerful individuals would only enter the prime of their lives. This was quite understandable for a 30-year-old holy maiden. However, what happened next was rather incomprehensible. Leona had an affair with a certain male. This wasn't a big deal, as she was actually a high-level member of the church. Not only that, she was deeply trusted by the gods. As long as she didn't spread it everywhere, it wouldn't be a big deal even if it severely affected the church's reputation. However, Leona just so happened to suddenly fall while preaching in public. Her divine power directly transformed into the evil power of the Chaos Abyss. Then, the priests discovered that she was pregnant. Her fetus actually had a very demonic reaction. The gods were furious and abandoned this descendant of theirs. After that, everything became logical. The Holy Maiden became the former Holy Maiden. Her past achievements became evidence that she was pretending to be righteous. She had to be punished for all her crimes. Everyone wanted her dead. Right now, Leona was tied to a cross in a public square. She would be burned at the stake in 4 days. At that time, it was unknown whether her soul would return to the divine kingdom or the Chaos Abyss. Oh, this holy maiden is quite beautiful. That demon is quite lucky with women. In order to avoid being late, I flew more than 300 kilometers in one night. It took me 2 days to finally arrive at the headquarters of the Lightning Sword Church and the Lightning Sword Church, Leafdew City. Leona had already been tied up in a public square for 8 days. Her body had been quite healthy to begin with, so she hadn't died yet. However, not drinking a single drop of water had caused her lips to dry up, and her eyes to become lifeless. It seemed that she had reached her limit. Even so, she still had a beautiful appearance. She had long legs and an excellent figure. Most importantly, she had a sharp and heroic aura as a swordsman. She could still be called a beauty. I silently lowered my hood as I faced the Holy Maiden's lifeless eyes. This time, I used my true appearance. From a certain standpoint, my sense of beauty was quite similar to Cavendish's. Even if I did something unnecessary, I might as well give it a try. That's him. That's him. The swordsman Ron. He's the one who seduced the Holy Maiden. However, the first to react wasn't Holy Maiden Leona. Instead, it was her maids. At the same time, an alarm sounded. High-level swordsmen and priests ran out of the church. Judging from how they were fully armed, it was evident that they had been prepared for this. The most inconceivable part of all was that a holy light lit up in front of me. The ropes were directly burned apart, and Leona, who had been reborn in holy light, stood before me with lightning coursing through her eyes and sword. "Ron, you actually dared to come here." No matter how foolish I was, I knew that I had fallen into a trap. Not only that, it was likely a trap prepared for someone else. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry as I looked at the holy maiden whose eyes were spewing lightning. "Would you believe me if I told you that I'm not Ron?" "Of course I would believe you. Would a bastard like you tell me your real name?" The next instant, lightning struck down. Yep, this was divine punishment. "Sylvan, you idiot, you struck the wrong person. You should go to the Chaos Abyss to find that bastard." Chapter 708. I was completely surrounded. There were archers on the roofs, a group of great swordsmen in front of me, and priests and bishops buffing me with divine arts. Lightning gathered in the hands of a black-robed mage in the distance. These mags who served Sylvan had received the blessing of lightning, and were incredibly skilled at controlling lightning and thunder. Leona's blonde hair was set aflame by her anger, and her surging divine blessing transformed into a draconic shockwave that repeatedly crashed into my mental world. Thunder continuously rumbled in the sky. The furious true God was watching me through his beloved daughter's eyes as he relentlessly lashed the ground with lightning. "Roan, your end is right before you." Leona's sword-wielding hands were slightly confused, but her sword didn't stop moving. The thunder in the sky was already right next to my ear. "Isn't it just acting cool? Do you really think I don't know how to?" Holy light descended from above. Her golden wings were the purest form of holy light, and the entire world was illuminated. A domain of holy light descended from the sky, accompanied by holy songs. "I, the strongest holy knight in the world, accept your challenge." At this moment, not only were the priests pausing in surprise, even God's punishment froze. Wasn't there something wrong with this scene? Wasn't it supposed to be an ambush against a demon king? Wasn't it supposed to be a 3-stage battle for 10 days and 10 nights? Why did a demon king suddenly transform into a holy knight? What? The strongest holy knight? The strongest holy knight? Wasn't that Estrada? That was a nickname given to him by others. But in this generation, who else apart from him would dare to call themselves the strongest holy knight? However, the holy knight before me had a purity of holy light that was comparable to the God of holy light. It was evident that he wasn't some random noob who was just starting out. The strongest holy knight, Estrada's most famous disciple, the one who dares to inherit this title. Leona hesitantly asked for a name when she recalled that vicious character on the calamity rankings. "Roland." Roland Mist. I nodded slightly. As expected, my name was quite famous. Even here had heard of me. That's more like infamous. "Look over there." Holy light wouldn't lie. After learning that I was Roland, the misunderstanding should have been resolved. However, there were more enemies, and they even brought ballistas from the city walls. It was almost as if they had leveled up. "I'm not here to invade. There's no undead army, no Mist Alliance army, and no floating airships. I swear in the name of holy light that a holy knight can't lie. Do you believe me now?" All right then, the thunder and dark clouds in the sky began to disperse, which made the atmosphere a much more pleasant. Finally. 20 minutes later, as I sat in Sylvan's church, I learned most of what had happened from Leona. This had happened almost 2 months ago. At that time, I was busy with the Elven Empire's affairs, so I had sufficient evidence of an alibi. Leona met a mercenary swordsman who called himself Ron. He seemed to be a dark attribute magic swordsman, but he was very cheerful and optimistic. He quickly established himself in Leaf Dew City. As for whether something had happened between Leona and Ron, and how Ron had managed to obtain the purity that Leona had kept for 30 years in just 2 months, no one knew except for outsiders. "You're not Ron. Ron wouldn't smile like you. Your smile is so fake, but his smile is so real." In a way, I was despised again. He took out a mirror and put on his treasured holy knight smile. His teeth were shining, perfect and flawless. How was it fake? I think I know who that Ron is. Actually, since you know me, Roland, you should have guessed who Ron is. Abyss Prince Cavendish. Leona squeezed out these words from between her teeth. Her words were filled with hatred. "That's right. Every debt has its debtor. Sylvan can go to the abyss and cause trouble for him. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that Sylvan is only a low god. He can't deal with that fellow and will probably be killed instantly. Leona unhesitatingly said such words of contempt for a god in someone else's shrine. Everyone looked at me with enmity, but I only quietly drank holy water. There was no helping it. I had served highly concentrated holy water, and all the tea leaves had been blasted apart by the holy water. It would seem that Leona was still suspicious of my identity. Actually, I didn't really care what Sylvan thought. After all, he was only a low god who had just ascended to godhood not long ago. I wouldn't be worried even if he descended with his true body. I could faintly sense life within her with my soul eyes as I looked at Leona's slender figure. I couldn't help but furrow my eyebrows when I sensed the powerful demonic power and mist bloodline within her. Another demon bloodline. This is so troublesome. While it was true that Cavendish was a bastard, he was also a demon lord. As far as I knew, descendants of high-level demons would be born into demon nobility, which wasn't so easy to obtain. From a certain standpoint, a demon lord's direct descendant would have to split off a portion of their power. At the very least, it would be 10%, and at the very most, 50%. High-level demons didn't need contraceptives. However, in the demon world, power was everything. Revealing one's weakness would equal death. Very few powerful demons would have many descendants. Those descendants could also be their backup bodies. It could be said that Leona didn't have any good intentions. 2 months ago, when the demon wave first erupted, it could be said that the entire world's attention was focused on the Elven Kingdom. As a Chaos main god, Sylvan had come to the mortal plane to pick up girls and even had a descendant. This was completely abnormal. Is he worried that he won't be able to survive the holy war and leave behind a descendant? I shook my head. This wasn't Cavendish's personality at all. Was he suddenly moved? That was possible. However, it definitely wasn't a coincidence that he had appeared here at that time. There was definitely something here that he wanted. I kept looking at Leona. She felt a chill run down her spine. It was highly likely that Cavendish's purpose for appearing here was related to her. This child was likely to be incredibly important. Perhaps Leona was also very special. Your fetus is probably using divine power to isolate its magic power, isn't it? Why don't you get rid of it? I don't believe that you'll show any mercy. Or do you still have feelings for it? I really want to cut it up into 12 pieces. But, if it dies, I'll die. Leona's words were filled with anger. However, I chuckled. Cough, sister-in-law. All right, Leona, perhaps I can help you take a look. I'm an expert surgeon. Ding. Congratulations to Roland for obtaining the title of God Surgeon. As I told my system to shut up, I looked at my new sister-in-law Leona. She had an expression of determination that she would be sacrificed. It seemed that she was about to agree. I'm willing to pay any price as long as I can get rid of this vile spawn. Her determination was quite obvious. If this trap didn't capture Ron, it was likely that Leona would directly commit suicide. However, I couldn't bear to see her die. Don't misunderstand, there was no script here. I only knew that although Cavendish was a playboy, he still treated his women quite well. Perhaps I could use her as bait to lure Cavendish out. Perhaps I'll even have to ask you to lie on a crucifix for 2 days. Chapter 709. In the end, I still wasn't able to convince Leona to be tied up on the cross. Cough, it wasn't that I suddenly felt pity for her. It was just that if I exposed myself, it would be highly unlikely that I would be able to use Leona as bait to lure out Cavendish. Even an idiot would know that this was a trap for Sylvan's church. Since I appeared in my true form, it was only natural that Cavendish would know that I was here. In that case, he definitely wouldn't come out unless he was willing to see me. Recently, I had already made it seem like I was looking for him, but he hadn't appeared in the past few years. He actually resisted showing off in front of me. Wasn't there something wrong with his style? This wasn't his style at all. What kind of noble goal was capable of suppressing his true nature and avoiding me? This made me even more worried. Although it was impossible for me to lure out Sylvan, how could I possibly give up on Leona? Sister-in-law. Leona, Half of the child in your stomach is mine. Don't cut it. Don't bite the one on the head, either. I'm being serious. My choice of words was indeed a bit dirty, but I really wasn't trying to scam her. I was simply using the rules of nobles to make up some nonsense. When a noble family had no descendants and was about to die out, it was still possible to bring back some illegitimate children who had been kicked out of the family. Although it seemed ridiculous, I indeed had no direct descendants. Back in the day, I was the eldest son of the Mist family. Since I had no descendants, it was indeed possible to find a successor from my relatives. My younger brother's son was indeed the most suitable descendant according to the ridiculous rules of noble heraldry. According to the unwritten rules of the nobles, which were also the laws of the nobles, I could even refuse to acknowledge the child's mother and father and steal the child as my own. There were actually many precedents of this even in the Middle Ages on Earth. Of course, other people would happily inherit their family's inheritance, while I would be stealing the child. Do you know what the child in your stomach represents? That's my only family member, which means you're also half my family member. I was speaking nonsense in a serious manner. Do you believe that if you want me to die out, I'll make Sylvan die out as well? Although the nobles valued their so-called bloodline inheritance, I truly wasn't a noble. Compared to bloodline inheritance, I valued cultural and spiritual inheritance more. What about the Mist family? The former Mist kingdom was already gone, so it didn't matter if it was gone. The current Mist Alliance and Donglan were doing fine as well. Actually, I didn't really care about being a descendant of the Mist. Renee and the others were also descendants of the people of the Mist, so it didn't matter if they had an inheritance. There was also no need to create another posthumous child to invite trouble. Who knew how many kinds of things Cavendish had planted over the years? It would be strange if he followed the rules of ordinary great demons. My real goal, I have two goals. The first goal is to steal the right to dissect Leona from Sylvan. I mean ownership. Leona was truly unique. The more I looked at her, the more I felt this way. Not only was her physical appearance unique, but it was also the result of my intuition and spiritual judgment. Cavendish was indeed a pervert, but it was definitely not his style to run off to pick up girls and make babies at this time, weakening his own strength. When I asked to perform a medical examination on Leona to see if there was anything special about her, everyone looked at me as if I were an enemy or a pervert. That Ron also made the same request. He said that he was already at the semigod level and needed to learn more about divine veins. The Holy Maiden agreed to his request. After that, a human life was taken. I understand. I felt rather helpless at how everyone was looking at me with vigilant gazes. Although I had spent 2 days and finally obtained a sample of Leona's blood and hair, obtained illegally, that alone was obviously not enough. Let's just dissect her. I was actually quite interested in divine veins as well. Leona's blood test results were quite disappointing. Apart from some divine power remaining in her bloodline, she was just a pure-blooded human. Meanwhile, the magical power of the fetus was currently corroding her power. The mother and fetus souls were now connected to each other. 1 death and 2 deaths had already been confirmed. However, even if the demon fetus was truly born, I doubted that Leona would be able to survive. Any other mage would most likely die here. However, for us, the soul was the source of everything. A powerful individual's true strength lay in their soul. Leona's history also proved how outstanding she was. Perhaps her true uniqueness lay in her soul. Let's dissect her instead. Why don't you tell me the truth? That there's still someone in the world who can save you. I'm not confident that I can save her. Not only that, I haven't decided whether or not to keep this demon fetus alive. It's highly likely that Cavendish created a spare body at this time. I used the nobility's laws to find excuses to continue messing around with the Lightning Sword Church and the Lightning Sword Church. Yep, I was taking advantage of the fact that they didn't dare to offend me, and that Sylvan was most likely no match for me. Right now, I was also preparing for my second goal. My second goal was indeed for the sake of my child. However, I wasn't aiming for the child itself. Instead, I was aiming to use the child's bloodline to trace back to Cavendish himself. It was quite common for spells to track someone's bloodline. The best medium for prophecy magic would be the target's family. I had originally intended to use prophecy magic to find Cavendish. Now that I had such a good medium, I couldn't miss out on it. Myself. I tried, but it didn't work. I didn't know if Cavendish had intentionally shielded himself, or if Leona's bloodline had changed so many times that prophecy magic no longer recognized their relationship as brothers. As for Renee and Glyna, their bloodlines were far too distant. While they were indeed mutated bloodlines that returned to their ancestors, they weren't directly related, so it would be meaningless. It could be said that the demon fetus before me was probably the existence whose bloodline was the closest to Cavendish's. How could I possibly let it go? And so, I stayed here for 10 days while spreading the word of holy light in front of the Lightning Sword Church and the Lightning Sword Church. Yep, Estrada's version of holy light. Since I was quite skilled at using all sorts of holy light and fireworks, I was able to attract many spectators every day. Perhaps this wouldn't affect Sylvan himself, but heretics and dark cultists would be spreading their teachings every day in front of the Lightning Sword Church. This would be quite embarrassing for both the Lightning Sword Church and the gods. Finally, we came to an agreement and prepared to head out together. Didn't you say that Cavendish agreed to go with you the moment you told him that you were going to take revenge on him? Didn't all your performances over the past few days go to waste? Silly cat, you know too much. I gritted my teeth as I spoke in a low voice. I really didn't expect this. When I told her that I was going to take revenge on Cavendish, Leona instantly packed her luggage and prepared to head out. We agreed that we would first go to the Mage Country to look for the Prophet Archmage, and then go together to see Cavendish. Over the past few days, I had been looking forward to seeing Cavendish's expression as I watched her rubbing her belly and smiling like the Holy Mother. Holy Maiden, vile spawn, Azura Field. There should be a copy here. Will there be a scene where I perform a disembowelment? I was joking, but the silly cat became serious. Promise me that you won't disembowel her the moment you go out. Also, do your best to solve her problem. Harlois, this isn't like you at all. Of course. She's a mother, and the child in her belly is even related to you by blood. You must be saying such dirty things on purpose, aren't you? You're definitely up to something bad. The silly cat's smile gave me goosebumps. But, I kept thinking about it, and didn't think that I'd seen anything wrong with her recently. Watch me take Auntie sister-in-law for 1,000 miles by myself. There should be a copy here. Chapter 710. In the end, I still wasn't able to convince Leona to be tied up on the cross. It wasn't that I suddenly felt pity for her. It was just that if I exposed myself, it would be highly unlikely that I would be able to use Leona as bait to lure out Cavendish. Even an idiot would know that this was a trap for Sylvan's church. Since I appeared in my true form, it was only natural that Cavendish would know that I was here. In that case, he definitely wouldn't come out unless he was willing to see me. Recently, I had already made it seem like I was looking for him, but he hadn't appeared in the past few years. He actually resisted showing off in front of me. Wasn't there something wrong with his style? This wasn't his style at all. What kind of noble goal was capable of suppressing his true nature and avoiding me? This made me even more worried. Although it was impossible for me to lure out Sylvan, how could I possibly give up on Leona? Sister-in-law. Leona, half of the child in your stomach is mine. Don't cut it. Don't bite the one on the head, either. I'm being serious. My choice of words was indeed a bit dirty, but I really wasn't trying to scam her. I was simply using the rules of nobles to make up some nonsense. When a noble family had no descendants and was about to die out, it was still possible to bring back some illegitimate children who had been kicked out of the family. Although it seemed ridiculous, I indeed had no direct descendants. Back in the day, I was the eldest son of the Mist family. Since I had no descendants, it was indeed possible to find a successor from my relatives. My younger brother's son was indeed the most suitable descendant according to the nonsensical theory of noble heraldry. According to the unwritten rules of the nobles, which were also the laws of the nobles, I could even refuse to acknowledge the child's mother and father and steal the child as my own. There were actually many precedents of this even in the Middle Ages on Earth. Of course, other people would happily inherit their family's inheritance, while I would be stealing the child. Do you know what the child in your stomach represents? That's my only family member, which means you're also half my family member. I was speaking nonsense in a serious manner. Do you believe that if you want me to die out, I'll make Sylvan die out as well? Although the nobles valued their so-called bloodline inheritance, I truly wasn't a noble. Compared to bloodline inheritance, I valued cultural and spiritual inheritance more. What about the Mist family? The former Mist Kingdom was already gone, so it didn't matter. The current Mist Alliance and Donglan were both fine. Actually, I didn't care much about descendants. Since Renee and the others were also descendants of the people of the Mist, it didn't matter. To me. There was also no need for him to create another posthumous child and cause trouble for himself. Who knew how many kinds of things Carwens had done over the years? It would be strange if he followed the rules of an ordinary great demon. My true goal, I have 2 goals. The first goal is to steal the right to dissect Leona from Sylvan. I mean the right to do so. Leona was truly unique. The more I looked at her, the more I felt this way. Not only was her physical appearance unique, but it was also the result of my intuition and spiritual judgment. Leona said, he T-to-to-to. T-to-to-to-to-to, I. T-to-to-toot. To-to, I when I asked to perform a medical examination on Leona to see if there was anything special about her, everyone looked at me as if I were an enemy or a pervert. That Ron made the same request. He said that he was already at the semigod level and needed to understand divine veins. The Holy Maiden agreed to his request, and then she died. I understand. I felt rather helpless at how everyone was looking at me warily. Although I spent 2 days and managed to obtain a sample of Leona's blood and hair, obtained illegally, that alone was obviously insufficient. Let's just dissect her. I was actually quite interested in divine veins as well. Leona's blood test results were quite disappointing. Apart from some divine power remaining in her bloodline, she was just a pure-blooded human. The magical power of the fetus was currently corroding her power. The mother and child's souls were now connected to each other. 1 death and 2 deaths were already confirmed. However, even if the demon fetus really came out, I doubted that Leona would be able to survive. Any other mage would probably die here. But for us, the soul was the source of everything. The truly powerful were their souls. Leona's history also proved how outstanding she was. Perhaps her true uniqueness lay in her soul. Let's dissect her instead. Why don't you tell me the truth? That there's still someone in the world who can save you. I'm not confident that I'll be able to save her. Besides, I haven't decided whether or not to keep this demon fetus. It's highly likely that Cavendish will create a backup body for his child now. I used the nobility's laws to find excuses to continue messing around with the Lightning Sword Church and the Lightning Sword Church. Yep, I was taking advantage of the fact that they didn't dare to offend me, and that Sylvan was most likely no match for me. And now, I was also preparing for my second goal. My second goal was indeed for the sake of my child. However, it wasn't for the child itself. Instead, it was to use the child's bloodline to trace back to Cavendish himself. It was quite common for spells to trace someone's bloodline. The best catalyst for prophecy magic would be the target's family. I had originally intended to use prophecy magic to find Cavendish. Now that I had such a good medium, I couldn't miss it. Myself. I tried, but it didn't work. I didn't know if Cavendish had intentionally blocked it, or if Leona and Leona's bloodline had changed so many times that prophecy magic no longer recognized their relationship as brothers. As for Renee and Glyna, their bloodlines were far too distant. While they were indeed mutated bloodlines that returned to their ancestors, they weren't directly related, so it would be meaningless. It could be said that the demon fetus before me was probably the existence whose bloodline was the closest to Cavendish's. How could I possibly let it go? And so, I stayed here for 10 days while spreading holy light in front of the Lightning Sword Church and the Lightning Sword Church. Yep, Estrada's version of holy light. Since I was quite skilled at using all sorts of holy light and fireworks, I was able to attract many spectators every day. Perhaps this wouldn't affect Sylvan himself, but heretics and dark cultists would be spreading holy light in front of his church every day. This would be quite a loss of face for both the church and the gods. Finally, we came to an agreement and prepared to head out together. Didn't you say that Cavendish agreed to go with you the moment you told him that you were going to take revenge on him? Didn't all your performances over the past few days go to waste? Silly cat, you know far too much. I gritted my teeth as I spoke in a low voice. I really didn't expect this. Leona instantly packed her luggage and prepared to head out after I told her that I was going to take revenge on Cavendish. We agreed that we would first go to the mage country to look for the prophet Archmage, and then go together to meet Cavendish. Over the past few days, I had been looking forward to seeing Cavendish's expression as I watched her rub her belly and smile like the Holy Mother. Holy Maiden, vile spawn, Azura Field. There should be a copy here. Will there be a scene where I perform a disembowelment? I was joking, but the silly cat became serious. Promise me that you won't disembowel her the moment you go out. Also, do your best to solve her problem. Harlois, that's not like you at all. Of course. She's a mother, and the child in her belly is even related to you by blood. You must be saying such dirty things on purpose, aren't you? You're definitely up to something bad. The silly cat's smile gave me goosebumps. But, I kept thinking about it, and didn't think that I'd seen anything wrong with her recently. Watch me take Auntie sister-in-law for thousands of kilometers by myself. There should be a copy here. Chapter 711. He hasn't evolved to the point where he knows what regret is. But now, I really hope that he will regret it. He should consider the consequences. Just what was Cavendish doing? What kind of goal did he have? I had some faint guesses, but I was unable to come to a conclusion. The reason? It was probably because I didn't believe that Cavendish would be so suicidal. Leona was right. Carwen's personality was very genuine. He had always acted as he pleased his entire life. He would cry if he wanted to cry, and he would make a fuss if he wanted to. If his own boss made him unhappy, he would simply rebel. His natural talents and abilities had always supported him in his success. It could be said that in Cavendish's eyes, everything was developing for the better. It was only natural for such a person to do something major. Since they were children of the heavens, they lacked fear and respect. They instinctively felt that everything was developing for the better. In that case, Cavendish would have nothing to fear. As for me, I was the exact opposite. I was probably the epitome of pessimism. After countless failures, I habitually placed all accidents in my plans. I couldn't count on anything that depended on luck. If even a 90% success rate could fail, then all I could do was plan until the success rate was 120% and completely eliminate all accidents. This sounded rather abstract, but an example was quite obvious. For example, if there was a lottery, Cavendish would probably buy 2 lottery tickets and hope that he would win on that day. With his luck, it really might be possible for him to win. However, I would never look at such a lottery from the very start, because I knew that I definitely wouldn't be the lucky one. If I bought a lottery ticket on that day, it would only mean that I had bribed the organizer to cheat. This time, if my inference was correct, Cavendish intended to use the entire world to buy a lottery ticket. The chances of winning were minuscule. If I didn't win, everything would be over. Roland, just what is Cavendish trying to do? Indeed, just what was he trying to do? Actually, the clues were right in front of me. I just didn't dare to admit it. He was searching for the location of Cynthia's physical body. He was trying to steal control over the Chaos Abyss, which meant that he was trying to steal the Creator-Goddess power and authority. Was he doing this for power? Actually, power itself was meaningless. Everyone knew that the strongest person in the world was the god of holy light. However, could he possibly wipe out the entire Chaos Abyss by himself? Carwen's was already at the pinnacle of the world. One step higher. Even if they could suppress over gods, it would be very difficult for them to kill them. Even if they could kill them, what would that change? This was an entire world with countless species, hundreds and thousands of gods, and billions of individuals. The decline of an individual, even if it was the death of a main god, would lead to the decline of a certain species, but it was still far from the entire world changing. After killing a certain main god B, its race gradually declined after 100 years. The space it left behind was naturally occupied by a new main god sea. A new race occupied its space. Perhaps these races would care, but the world did not. Merely pursuing greater power wasn't his style at all. If that was all he wanted, he would definitely appear in front of me and show off to me. Then there was no need for me to stop him. Then, the fact that he had been avoiding me meant that I would definitely not be able to accept what he wanted to do. He was trying to usurp the authority of the goddess of creation in order to achieve a goal. And this goal was something that I would definitely be unable to accept. It was highly likely that I would seriously fight him to the death. When I gathered all these chips, his goal also appeared before me. I had never dared to believe it, and had searched for evidence from many sources. But this time, he had gone too far. His opening up this world's dimensional barrier. The silly cat paused in surprise for a moment, but then she had an expression of indifference. In her eyes, this dimensional barrier was probably Aish's mortal plane. At any rate, the holy war had begun, and many dimensional residents were coming to Aish's mortal plane. Even if this dimensional barrier was completely destroyed, there wouldn't be any foundational change. It's not what you're thinking. It's that dimensional barrier. It's the dimensional barrier that connects the entire universe. The silly cat's expression became even stranger. As a resident of the world of Aishi, this was far beyond her understanding. This was just like telling someone from the Middle Ages that there were aliens living on a planet several thousand light-years away from us. That person would likely ask what a planet was. What's outside that dimensional barrier? What was outside? I really wanted to take out the dimensional barrier invaders from the game's history and throw them at Cavendish's face. He would likely be filled with fighting spirit, but my system stopped me. My ability is only effective in Ike. Those creatures from other dimensions were deduced by me based on the information I obtained last time. The goddess of order's power in the world of Aishi was only limited to extrapolating matters regarding the world of Aishi. The mystical existences outside the dimensional barrier were far beyond her abilities to begin with. But in the game's history, when two revived goddesses of order fought to the point of mutual destruction, the dimensional barrier that had been sealed off by their power naturally disappeared. Information that was beyond the goddesses of order's abilities was naturally impossible to extrapolate. And so, the goddesses of order took the information on the dimensional creatures from the creation war. Actually, this was meaningless. The two goddesses of order had already been destroyed when they both died. From a certain standpoint, the development of the world of Aishi was quite abnormal. And this abnormality had actually started from the creation war. Originally, this world had been peaceful. The two goddesses of order and order controlled this world. Mortals all lived together in this world. Demons weren't evil. They were originally the world's guards. Angels didn't represent order. Titans were strong craftsmen. Dragons didn't always eat insects. Dimensional invaders arrived in Aishi. A cruel war destroyed everything. Although the two goddesses of order and order led the residents of the world of Aishi to obtain victory, all that was left for the two goddesses of order and all other species was endless pain and ruin. In order to prevent the same thing from happening again, the two goddesses of order and order worked together to seal the dimensional barrier outside the dimensional barrier. The powerful dimensional invaders from the creation war were still fresh in their minds. It was possible that the seal could be broken. Just this alone made the two goddesses of order and order feel uneasy. And so, the two goddesses of order and order hoped that they and all other species would become even more powerful. There was no need to comment on the reason. Let's just look at the results. From this point on, Aishi's civilization began to develop in an abnormal manner. When a country or a species began to pursue pure power and combat strength, all civilization's progress would be judged by the effectiveness of the war. This was obviously no longer normal. While the war was still ongoing, luxuries like art, music, and literature were no longer necessities. Weapons and military industries were the pillars of the civilization. Magical advancements weren't for the sake of convenience or for the people's lives. Instead, it was for the sake of how to better and faster tear apart their enemies. But at this time, the mortals and order gods still remembered just how powerful the dimensional invaders from the creation war were. It seemed completely logical for them to pursue greater power in order to protect themselves. And then, the two goddesses of order and order disagreed on how to become more powerful. The goddess of order believed that order was the source of strength. The entire society would transform into a gigantic beast, and all existences would be nothing more than a part of it. The strict nature of order would allow this gigantic beast to become even more powerful. This meant that every individual of every species would have to repeat the order that had been passed down from their ancestors ever since they were born. As for the goddess of chaos, well, the chaos abyss and demons already explained everything. And, in a way, the holy war was also this world's civil war. The goddess of chaos always desired to evolve and become stronger. Weak civilizations and species would be eliminated in the holy war, while the civilizations and species that were able to continue advancing would become even stronger from the corpses of other species. Of course, with the holy war reaching such a stage, the mortal species had long since forgotten the original reason for the holy war. They would be quite happy if they could survive until the end of the holy war. But, what if one day, the dimensional barrier to the creation war suddenly disappeared, and powerful dimensional invaders from the creation war returned? What would happen? Such a thing should have been impossible to happen. The two goddesses of order and order still firmly held onto the key to the creation war. Even if the creation war appeared, it would only be during the Armageddon in the game's history. But now, Cavendish's rebellion had succeeded. Perhaps he had already obtained the key to the creation war. In that case, anything was possible. Countless dimensional invaders would descend and completely destroy this world. I would never be able to accept such a development. It had been so difficult for me to make the holy war the last, and it had been so difficult for me to finally reach the darkest moment before dawn. How could I possibly accept such a development? I really hoped that my guess was wrong, and that Cavendish wouldn't be so suicidal. But no matter how I looked at it, this seemed to be the most convincing conclusion. Perhaps this time, there really is no way to hold back anymore. Chapter 7:12. The days of exploration were a little dull, but not boring. During the day, he would travel, and during his free time, he would find his sister-in-law to practice his swordsmanship. At night, he would enter Harloy's soul world to study magic. At the very least, he felt that his life was quite fulfilling. Leona's talent in swordsmanship was truly astonishing. Her swordsmanship still needed time to improve, but her talent was really good, especially when it came to imitating the swordsmanship style of other sword saints. Especially when I was imitating Cavendish, the similarity was so high that I almost couldn't hold back a few times. Soon, it was time for us to make a choice in our journey. In the west, the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country are looking for a fortune-teller's help. However, it's likely that they'll get dragged into trouble. After all, the Bardi Empire is still at war with the undead. But with your ability and friendship, it won't be difficult. Southwest, San Antonio. If I'm not wrong, the sun god's mirror is over there. However, he could still get into trouble, and it would be extremely big trouble. The demon army there is a regular army, and their reputation may not be as big as their fists. If they are dragged into the demon army's battlefield, no matter how strong they are, they will still have to kneel. Harloy's kindly explained the situation to me, but she also revealed her own intentions. She wanted me to go to the Mage Country. It wasn't because of selfishness. No matter how he thought about it, it was probably because he wanted to save face. That's right. So what if it's face? I've been tutoring you every night, but you still can't advance. You are the stupidest student I have ever taught. Alright, even the words that hurt a student's confidence were shouted out, but I didn't feel like she was joking at all. She was being serious. She really thinks I'm the stupidest among her students. If you're so capable, come compete with me in undead magic and soul magic. I'll give you a 1-level handicap. Alright, if you're confident, then you can use necromancy magic to advance. The silly cat's words always caused me to choke on my words. I wanted to improve my power level in undead magic, but that incredibly dangerous magic sword not only had high requirements for materials, but it was also far too dangerous. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to control it without enough power, which was why I kept putting it at the very end of my progress list. Moreover, the type of energy used to advance first also had to be paid attention to. Epic-ranked divine weapons were ultimately a part of the physical body. The power would return to the physical body, so it would naturally affect the physical body to a certain extent. Holy Light's semigod rank individuals were either radiant, friendly, or dignified. Undead mags, on the other hand, had a sinister air about them. Either way, they didn't seem like good people. In a way, this could be considered a passive effect. I had yet to see any undead emperor with a righteous expression. The physical impression would also affect one's mind and soul, causing a certain change in one's personality and temperament. Adam felt hot just by looking at her. Marguerite was always mysterious. The influence on her temperament was mysterious, but in fact, it was just that. I didn't care about my image, but that death magic sword's design concept was far too extreme, so the feedback would definitely be quite strong. If I accidentally turned myself into a Lich, it would be quite embarrassing. I am a living human, an Order faction human. If I don't intend to change my appearance, the best choice would be the power of law or the power of holy light. The power of ice was a backup. It would probably have a certain freezing effect of facial paralysis and coldness, which was acceptable. I personally felt that the power of holy light would be the most suitable for a holy knight. That was because a holy knight would appear golden and righteous, which would make it easier for him to find a wife. I meant that it would be easier for him to communicate with the leaders of various countries. You want to improve your luck with women? I think that if you choose the path of holy light, you'll definitely receive more and more nice people. Don't you know how pitiful it is for holy knights these days? Sunny guys are no longer popular. Cool guys are the trend now. Your face is quite suitable for a cool guy. Fine, I admit that I was just spouting nonsense. Harlois was still trying to convince me to go to Bardi. However, the more she spoke, the less confident she was. Her expression became more and more pitiful, as if she was looking at a comedic actor who was trying to go down the path of tragedy. Her expression seemed to be saying, "You're hopeless. You're a natural-born comedic actor. Bastard, you actually said it out loud. I'm quite charming when I don't say anything. A mature woman once commented that I'm quite attractive. You still remember what your kindergarten teacher said to you, and you even became so beautiful because of your memories. That's so pitiful. If I had eyes, I would definitely cry." I now deeply understood how despairing it was to have a cat who could read minds and was skilled at hitting people when they fell into a trap, as well as an auntie who remembered all of one's dark history. Getting back to the main topic, the silly cat wasn't so fussing about which power system I should level up in wasn't purely because of such senseless things. After all, she would still need to achieve a balance in the end. I understood why she was fussing about it, because she didn't even try to hide it. She still wanted me to level up through her ice magic rather than the path of holy light that Estrada had taught me. If I went to the mage country, I would be able to level up as much as I could. Plus, with the tremendous amount of books in the Cloud Tower and the Ice Magic Grandmaster, it would be quite likely that I would be able to level up. If I went to the Sun God's magic mirror, I would probably be able to level up if I found it. Naturally, my Sword of Holy Light would level up. It was precisely because of this awkwardness that Harlois still wanted me to go to the mage country first. But in the end, I still decided to go to the mirror and level up my Dawn Sword first. And then, the silly cat hung on my head for an entire week. I felt like I was starting to become anemic. This wasn't because I had chosen Estrada's path in the end. It was simply a simple prediction of the situation. Indeed, going to the Bardi Empire seemed quite safe. Bardi's boss was an old acquaintance of mine, and we were even relatives now. The mage country was our home, and the undead emperors also had my ally, Sandro. But sometimes, I couldn't just look at the good side and not the bad side. Bardi's path seemed quite safe, but if I was unlucky, it would probably be the worst. Harlois, be reasonable. Are you certain that we won't run into an undead emperor who just so happens to be interested in me? What do you think our chances of victory are if we fight an undead emperor in our current condition? The silly cat was rendered speechless because it was so logical and so possible. Using ice magic against the undead who had no body heat was probably the worst possible choice. First completing my Sword of Holy Light before going to a region where I might run into an undead boss would be the wisest choice. Can't you think of something better? I'm used to it. Actually, I could be even more unlucky. For example, a main god-level demon boss would appear to kill me the moment I prophesied about Cavendish. Jinx. Shut up. Aren't you already unlucky enough? Harloy's words were so logical that I was actually rendered speechless. And so, I promised myself that as long as the conditions allow it, I would use ice magic to level up. In the end, I still decided to go find the magic mirror first. After all, rather than having a sudden inspiration that I could predict at any time, an actual treasure hunt seemed far more reliable. But at this time, I met with a small problem.